"That baby is not mine," Adrian Wolfe said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, his voice cutting through the music like a blade. And just like that, Naomi Carter's world tilted under her feet as hundreds of eyes turned toward her, not with sympathy, but with doubt. She stood there, one hand resting instinctively on her stomach, the other hanging by her side, frozen, not because she did not have words, but because she understood exactly what he had just taken from her. Her dignity, her truth, her place in that room. A quiet ripple spread through the crowd, whispers stacking on whispers, phones lifting, cameras locking in, and somewhere behind her, someone laughed, low but sharp, as if this was entertainment, not a life unraveling in real time. Naomi did not cry. Not yet. Her chest rose slowly, controlled, as she looked at him, really looked, searching for even a flicker of hesitation, a crack in that polished image he wore so perfectly, but there was nothing. Just calm detachment. That was the worst part. Not anger. Not denial. Indifference. As if she meant nothing at all. "Say it again," she said quietly, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. And for a brief second, the room held its breath, waiting for something to shift, something to break. But Adrian only adjusted his cuff, glanced at her like she was a minor inconvenience, and repeated it, slower this time, clearer. "That baby is not mine." The words landed heavier the second time, sinking deeper, sealing the narrative before she even had a chance to fight it. And just like that, it was decided, not by truth, but by power. A man like him did not need proof. His word was enough. Naomi felt it instantly, the shift in the air, the invisible line being drawn, separating her from everyone else in that room, turning her from a person into a problem. Someone stepped closer to Adrian, whispering something in his ear. Another hand touched his arm, guiding him away, protecting him, while Naomi was left standing alone in the center of it all, exposed, dissected, judged. No one asked her anything. No one needed to. The story had already been written for her. And yet, something inside her did not collapse. Not completely. Because beneath the shock, beneath the humiliation, there was a quiet, stubborn clarity forming, something small but sharp, refusing to disappear. She did not argue. She did not chase him. She did not beg. That would have made it easier for them. Instead, she turned, slowly, feeling every eye follow her, every whisper tighten, and walked out of that room without looking back, each step steady, measured, controlled, even as her heart pounded against her ribs like it was trying to break free. Outside, the night air hit her face, cool and sharp, and for the first time since he spoke, she exhaled, but it did not bring relief. Only silence. And questions. Too many questions. How did it come to this? When did truth become something that needed permission to exist? She closed her eyes for a second, her hand pressing gently against her stomach, grounding herself, reminding herself of what was real, even if the world had already decided otherwise. Behind her, the doors opened briefly, laughter spilling out again, the event continuing as if nothing had happened, as if she had not just been erased in front of everyone who mattered. That was when she understood. This was not just denial. This was strategy. And whatever came next would not be simple. By the next morning, the silence was gone, replaced by something colder, louder, and impossible to escape. Naomi did not even need to check her phone to feel it, the shift in the air, the way people looked at her before quickly looking away, as if eye contact alone might pull them into something messy. But she checked anyway, and the moment the screen lit up, her stomach tightened. The video was everywhere, not just shared, but edited, clipped at the exact moment Adrian spoke, his voice clean, confident, undeniable, while her response was barely there, cut short, almost erased. The comments moved fast, too fast to read fully, but the words that stood out were enough. Liar. Desperate. Gold digger. She locked her phone without finishing, her fingers suddenly cold, her breath shallow, but it did not stop there. It never did. At work, the shift was immediate. Conversations stopped when she entered the room. Smiles became tight, forced, or disappeared completely. Someone who used to greet her every morning suddenly found something urgent on their screen instead. Naomi sat at her desk, trying to focus, trying to move through the day like nothing had changed, but everything had. The air felt heavier, the space smaller. Even the light from the windows seemed harsher, exposing rather than comforting. Around noon, she noticed two co-workers whispering near the break area, their voices low but not low enough. She really thought she could pull that off, one of them said, and the other let out a quiet laugh. Naomi did not react. She kept walking. That was the only control she had left, how she responded or did not respond. But inside, something twisted, not just from the pain, but from the realization that this was moving too fast, too clean, too perfectly aligned against her. By mid-afternoon, her manager called her in. The tone was polite, almost rehearsed, but the words carried weight. "We think it might be best if you take some time off," he said, not looking directly at her, as if avoiding eye contact would make the decision feel less personal. Naomi listened without interrupting, her face calm, her posture steady, but her mind was already racing, connecting pieces that did not sit right. This was not concern. This was distancing, quiet removal. She nodded once, stood up, and walked out before he could add anything else. No one stopped her. No one asked if she was okay. That, more than anything, made it clear. She was already on the outside. Hours later, she sat alone in her apartment, the city noise muted behind closed windows, her phone face down on the table, refusing to look again. For a long moment, she said nothing, did nothing, just sat there, one hand resting gently on her stomach, grounding herself, reminding herself that there was something real beneath all the noise. "I know the truth," she whispered, barely audible, more to herself than anything else. But even as she said it, a question slipped in, quiet but sharp. If the truth was so clear, why did everything feel so controlled? She reached for her phone again, slower this time, not to scroll, not to read comments, but to watch the video one more time, carefully, frame by frame, her eyes narrowing slightly as she noticed something she had missed before. The timing, the angle, the way the camera was already perfectly positioned before Adrian even spoke, as if someone knew exactly when to record, exactly what moment to capture. Her thumb paused over the screen. That was not random. And the more she looked, the more it felt less like a moment and more like a setup. She leaned back slightly, her expression shifting, not softer, not broken, but sharper, more focused, as a new thought settled in, quiet but undeniable. This did not start on that stage, it started before that. Naomi did not sleep that night. Not really, because every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same moment again, the same room, the same words, and the same silence that followed. But this time, something else stood out, something sharper, something she could not ignore anymore. By morning, the thought had already taken shape. She needed answers. Not later. Now. She grabbed her keys without overthinking it, her movements faster than her mind could catch up, and within minutes she was on the road, the city passing by in a blur of glass and steel, her grip tightening on the steering wheel as one question repeated itself over and over again. Who set this up? She did not call. She did not plan. She just showed up. The building was exactly as she remembered, polished floors, quiet hallways, security at every corner, the kind of place where power did not announce itself loudly. It just existed, controlled, contained. Naomi walked straight to the front desk, her posture firm, her voice steady. "I need to speak with Adrian Wolf." The receptionist hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. That small pause told Naomi everything she needed to know. "Do you have an appointment?" the woman asked, already knowing the answer. Naomi did not respond right away. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, her eyes calm but unwavering. "He knows who I am." Another pause. Another shift. The receptionist glanced at her screen, then back at Naomi, her expression tightening just enough to signal discomfort. "I am sorry, but Mr. Wolf is not available." Not available. The words sounded simple, but the meaning behind them was anything but. Naomi straightened slowly, her mind already adjusting, already recalculating, but something inside her refused to walk away quietly this time. Not after everything. She stepped past the desk. It was not aggressive. It was not loud, but it was enough. "Ma'am," the receptionist called out, sharper now, and within seconds, two men appeared, not rushing, not reacting emotionally, just moving with quiet precision. Like this was routine. That was when Naomi felt it. Not fear exactly, but awareness, the kind that settles deep in your chest when you realize you have stepped into something structured, something controlled. "You cannot go any further," one of them said, his tone calm, almost polite, but final. Naomi stopped, not because she wanted to, but because she understood the line had already been drawn long before she walked in. For a moment, no one spoke. The hallway behind them remained empty, silent, untouched by the tension building in that small space. And Naomi could feel it, the invisible pressure, the unspoken rule. You do not push here, not without consequences. But she had already pushed. I just want 5 minutes, she said, her voice lower now, more controlled. But there was something else underneath it, something that did not match the situation, not fear, not panic, but something closer to defiance. The man in front of her did not react. That is not going to happen. Simple, direct, final. Naomi held his gaze for a second longer, then another, searching, measuring, trying to find even the smallest opening, but there was none. And that was when it hit her. This was not about access. This was about control. Who gets to speak? Who gets to be heard? Who gets to exist in the narrative? And right now, she was not part of it. Slowly, she stepped back, the tension easing just enough for the moment to dissolve. But the damage had already been done, not to them, but to her understanding of what she was dealing with. This was bigger than one man, bigger than one denial. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught something, a reflection in the glass panel near the elevator, not her own, but someone standing further down the hallway, partially hidden, watching, still, silent, and the moment their eyes almost met, the figure stepped back, disappearing before she could fully register who it was. Naomi froze for half a second, her breath catching, because that was not part of the plan, and suddenly, the question changed. Not who denied her, but who was watching her all along. She walked out of the building without looking back, but this time, it was different. This time, she knew she had crossed a line she was not supposed to see, and somewhere behind her, something had already started moving in response, something that made one thing painfully clear: she should not have come here at all. Naomi barely made it halfway down the block before she felt it again, that quiet pressure in the air, like something unseen had shifted behind her, and even though the street looked normal, people moving, cars passing, nothing out of place, she could not shake the feeling that she was no longer invisible, that somewhere, somehow, she had been marked. She slowed her steps, just slightly, not enough to draw attention, but enough to think, to breathe, to regain control of a situation that was slipping faster than she expected. That was when a black car pulled up beside her, smooth, silent, too precise to be random. It did not honk. It did not rush. It just stopped. Naomi kept walking at first, her eyes forward, her posture steady, telling herself it meant nothing. But then the passenger window lowered slowly, and a voice, calm and measured, broke through the noise of the street. Ms. Carter. She stopped. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough. Her name, spoken like that, without hesitation, without question, told her everything. This was not coincidence. She turned her head slightly, not fully, just enough to see him. The man inside did not look at her immediately. He sat there, composed, one hand resting lightly on the door, the other out of sight, his presence controlled, deliberate, like he was used to being listened to without needing to raise his voice. When he finally looked at her, it was brief, assessing, not curious, not emotional, just aware. You should not be here, he said, as if stating a fact, not offering advice. Naomi felt a chill move through her, not from fear, but from recognition. This was the system. Not loud, not chaotic, just present. She stepped closer to the car, not because she trusted him, but because walking away now felt like surrendering the only chance she might have to understand what was happening. Then tell me where I should be, she replied, her voice steady, but her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. The man's expression did not change. If anything, it became quieter. Somewhere safe, he said, and for a second, the word safe felt wrong, out of place, like it carried a meaning she was not fully allowed to understand. Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. Safe from what? A pause. Not long, but enough. Enough to make the silence heavier than any answer. The man leaned back just slightly, his gaze shifting past her, scanning the street for something she could not see. You are asking questions that affect people who do not like being questioned, he said finally, his tone still calm, still controlled, but now there was something else beneath it. A warning. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain. Naomi felt her fingers tighten slightly at her side. I am not asking questions, she said, quieter now, more focused. I am asking for the truth. For the first time, the man looked at her directly, really looked, and something in his expression shifted, not softer, not kinder, but sharper, as if he had just reassessed her entirely. That is exactly the problem, he replied. A car passed behind them, loud enough to break the moment, but not enough to erase it. Naomi held his gaze, refusing to look away, even as the weight of the situation pressed harder against her chest. Who are you? She asked. Another pause. This one longer. This one intentional. Someone who understands how this ends, he said. And then, just as calmly, and I am telling you, it does not end the way you think. Naomi felt something inside her push back against that, a quiet resistance, a refusal to accept that her story had already been decided without her. You do not know me, she said, her voice low but firm. The man almost smiled. Not fully, just enough to make it worse. No, he said, but I know the system you just walked into. The word system hung in the air between them, heavier than anything else he had said, because Naomi understood it now, not completely, but enough. This was not about one man denying her. This was about a structure that protected that denial, amplified it, controlled how it spread, and more importantly, controlled who could fight back. Her breath slowed, her thoughts sharpening, but for the first time since this began, she felt it clearly. The distance, the gap between her and whatever this was. It was not just wide. It was deliberate. Then why are you talking to me? She asked, because that was the one thing that did not fit. The man looked at her. For a second longer, then away, his attention shifting back to the street as if the conversation had already reached its limit. Because you already crossed a line, he said quietly. And now, they are watching. Naomi's chest tightened. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, physically, as if the air itself had changed. Who was watching? She asked, but the man did not answer. Instead, the window began to rise slowly, cutting off the space between them, closing the moment with the same precision it had started. Naomi stepped back instinctively, her eyes fixed on the glass as it sealed, her reflection staring back at her for a brief second before disappearing. The car pulled away without urgency, merging back into the flow of traffic like it had never been there at all, leaving nothing behind except the echo of that last sentence. They are watching. Naomi stood there for a moment longer, the city moving around her, normal, indifferent, unchanged, but inside, everything felt different. Smaller, tighter, controlled. And for the first time since this began, she understood something she could not ignore anymore. This was not a fight she could win by just telling the truth. Naomi did not move for a long time after the car disappeared, her feet planted on the sidewalk as if the ground itself was holding her there. But inside, everything was shifting, faster than she could organize, faster than she could control. They are watching. The words did not fade. They stayed, repeating, echoing, settling into something heavier than fear, something closer to awareness. She looked around, not dramatically, not obviously, just enough to notice what she had ignored before. The man across the street who had been standing too still. The car parked a little too long with the engine running. The way a passerby glanced at her, then quickly looked away, not curious, not concerned, just aware. Naomi exhaled slowly, forcing her body to relax even as her mind tightened. This was not paranoia. This was structure. This was control. And for the first time, she saw it clearly. She was not just being talked about. She was being positioned, reduced, managed. The realization did not break her. It did something else. It made her angry. Not loud anger. Not explosive. Something quieter. Sharper. The kind that does not show on the surface but changes everything underneath. She started walking again, slower. Now, more deliberate. Each step measured as if she was learning a new way to exist inside a space that was not designed for her to win. By the time she reached her apartment, the noise of the city had faded into something distant, almost irrelevant, and the silence inside felt different now. Not empty. Focused. Naomi closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a second, her eyes closing briefly, not to escape, but to gather herself. You are asking questions that affect people who do not like being questioned. The sentence replayed, but this time, it did not intimidate her. It clarified something. If they did not like questions, then there was something worth hiding. She pushed herself off the door and walked to the table, her movements calm, controlled, but her thoughts moving faster, connecting pieces, forming patterns. The video, the timing, the camera already in place, the way her voice was cut, the speed of the reaction, the immediate isolation. That was not coincidence. That was design. Naomi sat down slowly, her hand resting on her stomach again. But this time, the gesture felt different, not just protective, but grounding, anchoring her to something real in the middle of everything that felt manipulated. "I am not crazy," she said quietly, the words steady, deliberate, as if saying them out loud made them stronger. Because that was the first thing they take. Your confidence in your own reality. Your certainty in what you know. And once that is gone, everything else becomes easier to control. She reached for her phone again, but not to scroll, not to react. This time, she searched. Not his name, not the headlines. She searched the building, the company, the people around him. Quietly, carefully. The information was not obvious, but it was there, hidden behind layers of polished language and vague descriptions, connections that did not explain themselves directly, but hinted at something larger, something structured, something that operated without needing attention. Naomi leaned back slightly, her eyes narrowing as a new understanding settled in. This was not a single story. It was a system that protected its own version of the truth, and she had walked straight into it without knowing the rules. For a moment, doubt tried to creep in again, softer this time, more subtle. You cannot fight this. You do not have the power. You do not have the proof. She felt it, the weight of it, the truth in it, because it was not wrong. She was still alone, still without resources, still on the outside of something designed to keep her there. But then another thought followed, just as quiet, just as clear. If the truth was enough to threaten them, then it was enough to matter. Naomi opened the video again, watching it not as a victim this time, but as someone studying a pattern, her eyes catching every detail, every cut, every angle, every reaction that did not quite match the moment. She paused it at the exact second before Adrian spoke, her gaze locking onto a reflection in the background, faint but visible, someone holding the camera already focused, already ready. That was not spontaneous. That was planned. And if it was planned, then someone made that decision. Someone gave that instruction. Someone controlled that moment before it even happened. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the phone, not in fear, not in panic, but in something steadier. Resolve. She stood up slowly, her movements calm again, but different now, more intentional, more grounded, as if something inside her had finally aligned. She walked to the window and looked out at the city, the lights stretching endlessly, each one representing a life, a story, a system, and for the first time since this began, she did not feel small inside it. She felt aware. And awareness changed everything. "You wanted me quiet," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the room, but her meaning clear, firm, unshaken. "You should have made sure I never saw it." She turned away from the window, her expression no longer uncertain, no longer reactive, but focused, controlled, as if she had finally chosen her position inside a game she did not ask to play. And this time, she was not going to walk away from it. The next morning, Naomi did not rush, did not react, did not let emotion decide her pace anymore, because now she understood something she had missed before. This was not about speed. This was about control, and control always moved quietly. She stepped outside with a different awareness, her eyes no longer scanning for threats, but for patterns, small things, repeated things, things that did not belong but kept appearing anyway. The same black car parked 2 blocks down, not close enough to be obvious, but not far enough to be random. The same man from yesterday, pretending to check his phone but never actually leaving. Naomi noticed it all, but she did not react. Not yet, because reacting would mean confirming their expectations, and she was done playing the role they had already written for her. Instead, she adjusted. She walked slower. She stopped at a coffee shop she had never used before, choosing a table near the window, not hidden, not exposed, just visible enough to be seen if someone was watching. She ordered calmly, sat down, and placed her phone on the table, screen facing up, her fingers resting lightly beside it, as if she was just another person starting her day. But inside, Every detail was intentional. She opened the video again, but this time, she did not watch it. She let it sit there, visible, paused on that exact frame, the reflection in the background just clear enough to recognize if someone knew what to look for. Then she did something small, something almost meaningless on the surface. She leaned back slightly, as if distracted, and turned her phone just enough for the screen to catch the light from the window, making the reflection more visible to anyone looking from outside. Then she waited. Minutes passed. Nothing changed. The barista moved behind the counter. A couple laughed softly in the corner. The city kept moving. But Naomi did not shift. She stayed still, her breathing even, her posture relaxed, because this was not about forcing a result. This was about observing a reaction. And then it happened. Subtle, almost invisible. The man across the street, the one pretending not to watch, lowered his phone slightly, just for a second, his eyes narrowing as if trying to focus on something specific. Not on her. Not on her face. On the table. On the phone. Naomi did not move. She did not look up. But inside, something clicked. That was enough. He had reacted. Not to her presence, but to the information she allowed him to see. That meant one thing. They did not know everything. Not yet. And more importantly, they were still trying to control what they did not fully understand. Naomi slowly reached for her coffee, her hand steady, her expression unchanged, but her mind moving faster now, connecting the result to the pattern she had suspected. This was a system built on perception, on managing what people saw, what they believed, what they accepted as truth. But perception could be influenced, redirected, tested. She took a small sip, her eyes still down, her focus sharp, because now she had proof of something critical. A boundary, a limit. They were watching, yes. They were controlling, yes. But they were also reacting. And reaction meant vulnerability. For the first time since everything began, Naomi felt a shift, not outside, but inside herself. Not confidence, not victory, but direction. She was no longer just trying to survive what they had done to her. She was learning how they moved. And that changed everything. She finished her coffee slowly, giving the moment time to settle, time to confirm itself. And as she stood up to leave, she did not look at the man across the street, did not acknowledge him in any way, because she did not need to. She had already seen what she came to see. As she stepped back into the flow of the city, blending in, becoming just another person again, her thoughts sharpened into something clearer, something more defined. This was not about proving her truth all at once. This was about controlling when and how that truth appeared. And for the first time, she was not reacting to their system. She was beginning to test it. And somewhere behind her, without realizing it, someone had already taken out their phone and made a call. Naomi felt it before she saw anything change. That quiet shift in pressure, like the air had been adjusted just slightly around her, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her to recognize that something had moved inside the system. She kept walking, her pace steady, her posture relaxed, but her awareness sharper than ever, because now she understood the most important rule: attention was never random. If it came with purpose. By the time she reached the next intersection, her phone vibrated once, a single notification, nothing unusual on the surface, but Naomi did not check it immediately. She let it sit, just like she had learned, because reacting too fast meant giving them a rhythm to follow. Instead, she crossed the street, paused briefly at the corner, and only then glanced down at the screen. Unknown number. No. Message. Just a missed call. Naomi's expression did not change, but inside, something tightened slightly. That was new. Not observation. Not passive tracking. This was contact. Indirect, controlled, but intentional. She locked her phone again without calling back, her mind already shifting, recalculating the pattern. They had seen her test. They had reacted. And now, they were adjusting. She continued walking. But this time, the city felt different, not because it had changed, but because she had. Every reflection in a window, every shadow behind her, every small movement at the edge of her vision carried weight now, not fear, but information. She stepped into another building, not her own, not a place she needed to be, just a public lobby with mirrored walls and clean lines, a place where she could see without being obvious. Naomi stood near the center, her eyes moving casually across the reflections, and there it was again. Not the same man from before. Someone else. Different posture. Different distance. Same stillness. That was when it became clear. This was not one person. This was a system rotating around her, adjusting positions, maintaining distance, controlling visibility. Naomi exhaled slowly, her hand brushing lightly against her stomach, grounding herself again, reminding herself that she was still in control of one thing. Her next move. She stepped back outside, blending into the crowd again, but now she could feel it, the difference in how they watched her. It was no longer passive. It was focused, curious, and underneath that, cautious. That part mattered, because caution meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant she had already disrupted something. By late afternoon, she returned to her apartment, the space quiet, still, unchanged, but she did not sit down right away. She moved to the window, her eyes scanning the street below, not searching for someone specific, but for behavior, for patterns that repeated, for anything that did not belong. A car slowed, then continued. A man paused, then moved again. Nothing obvious. Nothing clear. But Naomi did not need clear anymore. She needed consistent. And what she saw, what she felt, what she understood, was enough. She turned away from the window and picked up her phone again, this time unlocking it with intention, her fingers steady as she opened her contacts, not to call anyone she knew, but to scroll through something else. Old messages, old connections, people she had once trusted, people who had slowly disappeared from her life without explanation, and now, looking back, it did not feel random anymore. It felt managed. Naomi stopped on one name, someone who used to work close to Adrian, someone who left suddenly, quietly, without details. Her thumb hovered over the screen, not hesitating, but calculating. This was different. This was not observation. This was a move. Small, controlled, but visible. She tapped the name and typed a simple message. I need to ask you something. It matters. She did not add emotion. She did not explain. Then she sent it. And just like that, she placed herself back into the system, not as a target this time, but as a variable. The phone stayed still in her hand, the screen glowing faintly as seconds passed, then a minute, then two, and for a brief moment, nothing happened. But Naomi did not move. She waited, because waiting was no longer passive. Waiting was part of the strategy. And then, finally, the screen shifted. A reply. Just 2 words. Do not. Naomi's breath slowed, her eyes narrowing slightly, because that was not a refusal. That was a warning. And warnings only come when something is real enough to be dangerous. She lowered the phone slowly, her mind already moving ahead, connecting this response to everything else she had seen, everything else she had felt. This was not just about controlling her. This was about containing something bigger, something that should not be exposed. Naomi stepped back toward the window, her reflection faint in the glass, her expression no longer uncertain, no longer reactive, but focused in a way it had never been before. Because now, she understood something that changed everything. They were not just watching her, they were trying to understand her. And that meant one thing. She was no longer predictable. Naomi did not respond to the message right away, not because she did not understand it, but because she understood it too well, and that made it heavier than anything else she had heard so far. Do not. Not I cannot. Not I will not. Just do not. A warning without explanation, which meant the explanation was too dangerous to say out loud. She set her phone down slowly, her fingers lingering for a second before pulling away, her mind already replaying every moment that led her here, every decision, every reaction, every detail she had overlooked when she was still trying to survive instead of understand. For a brief moment, the anger rose fast, sharp, almost overwhelming, because now it was clearer than ever. This was never about whether he believed her or not. That part had already been decided long before she stepped onto that stage. She walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, but did not drink it right away, just held it in her hand as if grounding herself in something simple, something real, while everything else felt constructed. The video, the timing, the reaction, the isolation, the silence that followed. It all aligned too perfectly, like pieces placed in position, not by chance, but by design. Naomi closed her eyes for a second, her breath steady, but her thoughts moving faster now, connecting something deeper, something harder to accept. She was never meant to be believed. That realization did not break her. It shifted her. Because if she was never meant to win in that moment, then the moment itself was not the point. It was the setup. She opened her eyes slowly, her expression changing, not softer, not weaker, but sharper, more focused, as if something inside her had finally clicked into place. She walked back to the table, picked up her phone again, and opened the message thread, reading those 2 words one more time, this time not as fear, but as confirmation. Someone knew. Someone had seen this before, and someone had chosen silence. Naomi leaned back slightly, her mind stepping outside her own experience, looking at it from a distance, and for the first time, she saw herself the way they must have seen her. Not as a person, not as a threat, but as a variable. Someone useful, someone disposable, someone who could be positioned in a moment that served a larger purpose. Her chest tightened, not from confusion, but from clarity, because that meant one thing she could not ignore anymore. The denial was not just about avoiding responsibility. It was about controlling a narrative that needed her to fail. She stood up again, slower this time, her movements deliberate, controlled, as if every action now had weight, meaning, direction. She walked back to the window, her reflection faint against the city lights, her eyes scanning the distance, not for someone watching, but for something larger, something she could not fully see yet, but could feel everywhere around her. "You made me part of something," she said quietly, her voice calm, almost steady, but underneath it, something had changed. The hurt was still there. The humiliation had not disappeared, but it was no longer the center. Understanding was. And understanding was dangerous. She thought back to the event, to that exact second before he spoke, the way the room felt ready, the way the camera was already focused, the way no one questioned him after, not even for a moment. That was not influence. That was agreement. Prearranged. Silent. Absolute. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly at her side, her jaw setting as another thought formed, slower this time, heavier. If that room had already chosen a side before she even spoke, then she was never the one being judged. She was the example, a demonstration, a message to anyone else who might try to challenge the same system. The anger came back then, but it was different now, not chaotic, not reactive, but cold, controlled, focused into something sharper. She was not just hurt. She had been used. And that changed everything. She turned away from the window and walked back to the table, picking up her phone again, not to search, not to scroll, but to think, her thumb hovering over the screen as she considered her next move, not as someone trying to prove the truth, but as someone trying to understand the rules of a game she had been forced into. Because now she knew one thing for certain. This was not just about him. It was about something behind him, something bigger, something that needed this story to exist exactly the way it did. And if that was true, then what really mattered was not what happened that night, but why it had to happen at all. Naomi did not rush into her next move, not anymore, because now she understood that every step she took was not just seen, it was measured, interpreted, and possibly redirected if she was not careful. So she slowed down, not in hesitation, but in control. That night, instead of searching for more answers, she did something different. She organized what she already had. The video, the reflection, the timing, the reactions, and most importantly, the silence of people who knew more than they were willing to say. She sat at the table, her phone in front of her, a notebook beside it, something simple, almost old-fashioned, but deliberate, because writing things down forced clarity, forced structure. She began listing details, not emotions, not assumptions, just facts. Time of the event, camera angle, who stood where, who reacted first, who did not react at all. Patterns began to form, small at first, then sharper. There was a man in the background, not obvious, not central, but present in multiple frames, always positioned near the edge, never speaking, never reacting, just there. Naomi paused, her pen hovering slightly above the paper, her eyes narrowing as she replayed the footage again, this time focusing only on him. He was not part of the crowd. He was placed. And once she saw it, she could not unsee it. That was not a guest. That was someone assigned. Her breath slowed, not from fear, but from focus, because this was the first time she had something concrete. Not proof. Not yet. But direction. She took a screenshot, then another, capturing the moments where he appeared most clearly, then zoomed in, adjusting the contrast just enough to sharpen the outline of his face. It was not perfect, but it was enough. Enough to recognize if she saw him again. Naomi leaned back slightly, her mind already shifting from observation to strategy. This was her first piece. Small, fragile, but real. She saved the images, then did something even more careful. She sent one of them, not to a friend, not to someone she trusted emotionally, but to a number she barely knew. The same contact who had warned her before. No message, no explanation, just the image. Then she waited. Seconds passed, then a minute, then another. This time, the response came faster. A typing indicator appeared, disappeared, then appeared again, as if the person on the other end was choosing words carefully, weighing every letter. Finally, the message came through. Delete this. Naomi did not. Instead, she read it again, her lips pressing together slightly, because that was not denial. That was recognition. And more importantly, urgency. Her heart beat a little faster now, not from panic, but from confirmation. She had touched something real, something they did not want seen. Naomi placed the phone down slowly, her thoughts aligning into something sharper, more controlled, because now she understood the balance. She had a piece of leverage. Small, yes. Fragile, yes. But enough to shift her position, even if only slightly. The system was no longer just watching her. It was reacting to what she might expose. And that meant she was no longer just a target. She was a risk. But risk went both ways. Naomi stood up and walked to the window again, her reflection steady, her expression calm, but her eyes more focused than ever before, because now the game had changed, just a little. Not enough to win, not even close, but enough to matter. She picked up her phone again, her fingers steady as she opened the image once more, studying it, memorizing it, because she knew one thing for certain. If she lost this, she lost her only advantage. And then, just as she was about to lock the screen, something else caught her attention. A new notification. Not from the same contact. A different number. No name. No history. Just one message. You should not have sent that. Naomi's breath paused for half a second, her eyes locking onto the screen, because this was not a guess. This was confirmation. Someone else had seen it. Someone she did not reach out to. Which meant one thing. The moment she made her move, the system moved back. And somewhere, someone who had not paid attention to her before was now watching her very closely. Naomi did not sleep that night, not because she could not, but because something inside her refused to rest, as if her mind already knew that the moment she closed her eyes, something would shift again, something she would not be ready for. The message stayed on her screen longer than it should have. Those simple words, "You should not have sent that," repeating in her thoughts, not as a threat, but as a promise. A consequence already in motion. By morning, it arrived. Not loudly, not dramatically, just gone. Naomi reached for her phone the second she woke up, her fingers moving automatically, her eyes still adjusting to the light. But the moment the screen unlocked, something felt wrong. The image. It was gone. Not deleted from the gallery, but corrupted, replaced by a blank file that would not open, would not load, as if it had never existed in the first place. Naomi sat up slowly, her breath tightening, her fingers tapping the screen again, trying another file, then another, but the same result. The screenshots were still there, but they were empty. Her chest rose sharply now, her calm slipping just slightly as she opened her messages, scrolling back to the contact who had told her to delete it. The message was still there. Her sent image was not. Just a blank space. No preview. No record. Like she had imagined the entire thing. No. She whispered under her breath, not in denial, but in disbelief at how clean it was, how precise. This was not just monitoring. This was control at a level she had not fully understood until now. She stood up too quickly, her chair scraping slightly against the floor, her mind racing, trying to retrace her steps, trying to find where she still had something, anything, but every path she followed led to the same place. Nothing. The leverage she thought she had was gone. And worse than that, it had been taken without a trace. Naomi pressed her hands against the table, her head lowering slightly as she forced herself to breathe, slow, controlled, because panic would only make it worse. But the pressure was building now, heavier than before, sharper, more personal. They were not just reacting anymore. They were erasing. She grabbed her phone again, her fingers moving faster this time, opening her email, her cloud storage, any place where the file might still exist, but every search came back the same. Blank. Missing. Untouched, except for that one piece. That one thing she needed most. Her stomach tightened, not just from stress, but from something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to losing control. Because this was the first time she had pushed back, and this was how they responded. Not with noise, not with confrontation, with removal. Clean. Silent. Final. Naomi stepped back from the table, her mind trying to stabilize, trying to reframe what this meant, but the conclusion was unavoidable. If they could reach into her phone, if they could erase something that easily, then nothing she had was safe. Not her evidence, not her communication, not even her sense of what was real and what was not. She walked slowly toward the window again, her movements heavier now, less certain, her reflection in the glass looking different, not weaker, but more exposed, more vulnerable than she had allowed herself to feel before. Outside, the city continued like nothing had changed, people moving, cars passing, life unfolding in its usual rhythm, but Naomi felt completely disconnected from it now, like she was standing behind something invisible, separated from a world that no longer followed the same rules. They took it, she said quietly, her voice barely steady, because saying it out loud made it real in a way she could not avoid anymore. This was not just about proving the truth. This was about surviving a system that could rewrite it. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach again, a small, grounding gesture, but this time, it did not bring the same calm. Because now, the risk was no longer just hers. And that changed everything. Her breathing became uneven for a moment, her composure cracking just enough to let the weight of it all press through. The isolation, the manipulation, the realization that every move she made could be undone before she even saw it happen. She had stepped into something far deeper than she was prepared for. And now, it was closing around her. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, her head lowering, her shoulders tightening as the pressure built, not just from what she had lost, but from what it meant. She was not ahead. She was not even level. She was behind, and they were already adjusting faster than she could react. For the first time since she decided to fight back, the thought slipped in, quiet but dangerous. What if she could not win this? What if she had already gone too far? Naomi opened her eyes slowly, but the clarity she had felt before was gone now, replaced by something heavier, something closer to the edge, because this was no longer just a game of strategy. This was survival, and she was running out of ground to stand on. Naomi did not move for a long time after that thought settled in, the one she did not want to say out loud, the one that lingered in the silence like something waiting to take shape. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but mentally, as if every wall had closed in just enough to remind her there was nowhere left to run. She lowered herself slowly into the chair, her movements heavy, controlled only by habit, not intention, her hands resting loosely in her lap as her eyes drifted to nothing in particular. For the first time since everything began, she was not thinking about the system, not analyzing patterns, not searching for control. She was just still. And in that stillness, the weight of it all finally settled. Not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece, like something sinking deeper the longer she tried to ignore it. The humiliation, the isolation, the way people had turned without hesitation, the way her truth had been erased before she could even hold on to it. Naomi swallowed slowly, her throat tight, her breathing uneven, not from panic, but from something quieter, something harder to fight. Exhaustion. Emotional, mental, physical. The kind that does not come from one moment, but from too many moments stacked on top of each other without relief. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on her knees, her head lowering just enough for her hair to fall around her face, creating a small space where she did not have to hold herself together for anyone else. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered, the words barely audible, not a question for someone else, but for herself, because for the first time, she did not have an immediate answer. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the loss, not the fear, but the absence of direction. She had pushed. She had tried. She had found something real, and it had been taken from her like it never existed. That kind of control, it did not just take your advantage. It made you question whether you ever had one at all. Naomi closed her eyes slowly, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach again, but this time, It was not just grounding. It was searching for something that had not been touched by everything else. Something that was still hers. Something that had not been rewritten or erased or manipulated. Her breathing slowed, just slightly, as she focused on that one point, that one connection that remained untouched by the system surrounding her. And for a moment, just a moment, the noise faded. Not completely, not permanently, but enough. Enough for her to hear her own thoughts again. And what she heard was not panic. It was not defeat. It was something quieter, something buried under everything else. A question, not, why is this happening? But why me? Naomi opened her eyes again, her gaze unfocused at first, then slowly sharpening as the thought settled deeper. Not emotionally, logically, because if this had been planned, if this had been structured, if she had been placed into that moment for a reason, then her role was not random. She was chosen, and that meant something, even if she did not understand what yet. She leaned back slightly in the chair, her posture still heavy, but her mind beginning to move again, slower this time, more careful, less reactive. You are asking questions that affect people who do not like being questioned. The words returned, but they sounded different now. Not like a warning, like a clue. Because if her questions mattered enough to trigger that kind of response, then she had already touched something real, something important. Naomi looked down at her hands, her fingers still, her breathing more stable now, because even though she had lost the evidence, even though she had been pushed back harder than she expected, there was one thing they had not been able to remove. The fact that they reacted. And reaction always meant something. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just slightly as the weight shifted, not disappearing, but redistributing into something she could carry. Not easily, not comfortably, but intentionally. Naomi sat there for another moment, the silence no longer suffocating, just present, as she allowed the realization to settle completely. She had lost the first move. That was true, but she had not lost the game. Not yet. And more importantly, she understood it now in a way she had not before. Slowly, she pushed herself up from the chair, her movements steady again, not rushed, not forced, just decided. She walked to the table, picked up her phone, and held it in her hand for a second longer than necessary. Her eyes focused, her expression calm, but no longer uncertain. Because this time, she was not reacting to what they had done. She was preparing for what she would do next. Naomi did not look at her reflection this time, not because she was avoiding it, but because she no longer needed it to understand what had changed. The shift had already happened somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter, in the way her thoughts moved, in the way her emotions no longer rushed ahead of her decisions. She placed her phone back on the table, not gently, not carelessly, just precisely, as if every movement now carried intention, and for a moment, she stood still again, not lost, not overwhelmed, but calculating. The difference was subtle, almost invisible from the outside, but inside, everything had reorganized. Before, she had been trying to prove something. Now, she was trying to understand who controlled what could be proven. That distinction changed everything. Naomi walked slowly across the room, her steps measured, her breathing even, her mind no longer chasing answers but filtering them, discarding anything emotional, anything reactive, anything that did not serve a purpose. Because now she saw it clearly. Emotion was the first thing they used against her. Her reaction, her shock, her need to be believed. All of it had been predictable, and predictability was leverage. She stopped near the window again, but this time, she did not look out. She looked at the glass itself, at the faint outline of her reflection, and for a brief second, she studied it, not with judgment, not with pain, but with distance. You let them control the moment, she said quietly, not as blame, but as fact. And the moment she said it, she did not feel guilt. She felt clarity, because if something could be controlled, it could also be disrupted. Naomi turned away from the window, her expression steady, her eyes sharper now, less reactive, more observant, as if she was seeing layers that had always been there, but never fully visible until now. She moved back to the table and picked up her notebook again, flipping to a clean page, her pen hovering for a second before she began writing. Not emotions, not memories, but structure. Names, positions, timing, influence. She was no longer documenting what happened. She was mapping how it happened. The system was not random. It was consistent. It rewarded silence. It punished disruption. It controlled perception. And most importantly, it relied on people who followed its logic without questioning it. Naomi paused, her pen still, her eyes narrowing slightly as another realization settled in, slower this time, more precise. If the system depended on predictability, then unpredictability was not weakness. It was advantage. Her lips pressed together slightly, not in frustration, but in thought, because this was the first time she was not just reacting to their control. She was identifying its limits. She set the pen down gently and leaned back, her gaze shifting upward, not searching, just processing, letting the structure take shape fully before she acted on it. Because this time, action would not come from impulse. It would come from understanding. Her phone remained on the table, silent, still, but she knew that silence did not mean absence. It meant observation. It meant they were still there, still watching, still adjusting. But something had changed on her side too. She was no longer trying to hide from that. She was accounting for it. Naomi reached for her phone again, unlocking it slowly, her fingers steady as she opened a blank note, her eyes focused as she typed just a few words. Not a message, not a response, a reminder. Do not react. Make them react. She read it once, then locked the screen again, placing the phone down in the exact same position as before, because repetition mattered. Patterns mattered. And now she was the one choosing them. She stood there for a moment longer, the room quiet, the air still, but inside, the chaos that once filled her thoughts had been replaced by something else. Control. Not complete. Not perfect. But enough to begin again. Naomi took a slow breath, her hand resting briefly against her stomach, but this time, the gesture was not searching for comfort. It was grounding a decision. Because whatever came next would not be about proving her truth in their system. It would be about changing how that system responded to her. She stepped away from the table, her posture straight, her movements calm, but there was something different in the way she carried herself now, something less visible, but far more dangerous. The hesitation was gone. The need for validation had disappeared. In its place was something quieter, colder, focused. And as she moved through the room, no longer pausing, no longer second-guessing, one thing became undeniable. She was not the same person who walked into that room the night everything changed. She had learned the rules, and now, she was ready to break them. Naomi did not announce her next move, did not rush into it, did not even fully commit to it until she understood exactly what she was testing, because now she knew the difference between action and leverage. Action created noise. Leverage created response. And response revealed structure. She sat at the table again, her phone in front of her, her notebook open but untouched this time, because what she needed now was not more analysis. It was execution. Small, controlled, precise. Her eyes moved across the screen as she opened a new message, not to the contact who warned her, not to anyone directly connected to Adrian, but to someone further out, someone adjacent, someone who existed close enough to the system to feel its pressure, but not important enough to be fully protected by it. A former event coordinator. Someone who had been present that night. Someone who had quietly disappeared from the inner circle months ago. Naomi typed slowly, each word deliberate. I know the camera was placed before he spoke. I know it was not random. She paused, not because she doubted it, because she understood the weight of what she was about to imply. Then she added one more line. I am not asking you to confirm it. I am asking you to not deny it. She read the message once, then sent it, and then she did nothing. No follow-up. No pressure, because this was not about forcing information. It was about creating discomfort. She leaned back slightly, her breathing even, her eyes steady on the screen, waiting not for a reply, but for a reaction, because now she understood something critical. People inside systems like this did not respond to truth. They responded to risk. Minutes passed. The silence stretched. But Naomi did not move. Because she knew, the message had already done its job the moment it was delivered. Somewhere, someone had read it. Somewhere, someone had realized that she knew more than she should. And that realization always triggered movement. 10 minutes later, her phone vibrated. Not a message. A notification. A small one. Easy to ignore if you were not paying attention. But Naomi was. A profile she had searched earlier, one connected loosely to the company, had just been updated. The timing was too exact to be coincidence. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning carefully, and there it was. A subtle change. A name removed from a past event listing. The same man she had identified in the background. Erased. Quietly. Without explanation. Naomi's lips pressed together slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition, because this was exactly what she expected. They were cleaning, adjusting, responding, which meant one thing. Her message had landed exactly where it needed to. She did not smile. She did not react outwardly. But inside, something shifted again, not emotionally, but structurally, because this was no longer theory. This was confirmation. She had not just observed the system. She had influenced it. Naomi locked her phone and set it down carefully, her movements calm, controlled, but her mind already moving ahead, mapping what this meant for her next step, because now she understood something she had not fully grasped before. They were not untouchable. They were careful, and careful systems could be pressured. She stood up slowly, walking toward the window again. But this time, her reflection looked different, not because her appearance had changed, but because her presence had. There was no hesitation left, no uncertainty, only calculation. "You do not erase something unless it matters," she said quietly, her voice steady, almost detached, as if she was stating a principle rather than reacting to an event. Because that was what this was now. Not personal, structural, and structures could be shifted. She looked out over the city, the same lights, the same movement, but this time, she was not outside of it. She was inside it, moving within it, testing it. And for the first time since everything began, she was not waiting for them to act. She had made them act first. That was the difference. That was the shift. And it was bigger than she expected. Because this was not just a small reaction. This was a correction at their level. Quiet, controlled, but undeniable. Naomi turned away from the window, her posture straight, her movements steady, her mind no longer chasing answers, but creating pressure, because now she knew exactly where to apply it. And as she picked up her phone again, not hesitating, not questioning, one thing became clear in a way it never had before. She was no longer the one being positioned. She was the one changing the position. And somewhere, behind the silence of the system she had just disturbed, someone was already realizing the same thing. She was not supposed to be able to do that. And now, they could not ignore her anymore. Naomi did not plan to see him that day. And that was exactly why she knew the moment mattered, because nothing inside that system happened without intention, and if this was happening now, it meant something had shifted enough to allow it. The building was quieter than before, the same polished surfaces, the same controlled silence. But this time, no one stopped her when she walked in. That alone told her everything. She was expected. Naomi did not slow down, did not hesitate, her steps measured, her posture steady, as if she had always belonged there, even though she knew she did not. Not yet. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have, not because of distance, but because of the weight of what was waiting on the other side. When the doors opened, the hallway was empty, almost too empty, like a space cleared intentionally. And at the end of it, the door, slightly open, not an invitation, not exactly, more like a test. Naomi walked forward, each step quiet against the floor, her breathing even, her mind already shifting into focus, because this was no longer about gathering information. This was about presence, about how she held herself in a room designed to make her feel small. She pushed the door open just enough to step inside. The office was exactly what she expected. Clean, minimal, controlled, and he was there. Adrian Wolfe stood near the window, not turning immediately, not acknowledging her right away, as if her arrival did not require his attention. But Naomi understood the performance now. This was not indifference. This was positioning. She did not speak first. That was the first rule she had rewritten for herself. Silence was no longer weakness. It was pressure. Seconds passed. Then Adrian turned slowly, his expression unreadable, calm, composed, but his eyes sharper than before, more focused, as if he was no longer looking at her as a problem to dismiss, but as something to evaluate. "You have been busy," he said, his voice controlled, measured, not accusing, not welcoming, just observant. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation, her face calm, her posture steady, not challenging, but not yielding either. "You noticed," she replied, her tone even, almost neutral, but underneath it, something deliberate, something that refused to shrink in the space between them. Adrian's gaze held for a moment longer than necessary, just enough to test, just enough to measure, and Naomi did not look away. That was the difference now. Before, she had been reacting to him. Now she was holding position. "You are asking questions," he said, stepping slightly closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough to shift the dynamic, to remind her of the distance that still existed. "I am learning patterns," Naomi answered, her voice quiet, controlled, but precise, each word placed exactly where she wanted it. A pause. Not empty. Heavy. Because now, the conversation was no longer about denial. It was about awareness. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in the air did, something subtle, something that tightened just slightly, as if the space itself was adjusting to a new variable. "That is dangerous," he said. Naomi almost smiled. Not fully, not visibly, just enough to feel it internally, because now she understood something he did not say. "Dangerous? To who?" "Only if I am wrong," she replied, her eyes steady, her voice calm, and for a brief second, the silence that followed carried more weight than anything else in the room. Adrian's gaze shifted slightly, not away, but deeper, as if he was reassessing her entirely, not as the woman from that night, not as the one who stood there and was dismissed, but as someone else. Someone who had changed the rules without asking permission. "You are not supposed to see it this way," he said quietly. Naomi tilted her head just slightly, not in confusion, but in acknowledgement, because that sentence was more revealing than anything else he had said so far. "Not supposed to," which meant designed not to. "But I do," she answered, just as quietly, her voice steady, her presence grounded in something that was no longer fragile. Another pause, longer this time. And in that silence, Naomi felt it clearly, not fear, not uncertainty, but tension. Real tension, not one-sided, not controlled entirely by him. Shared, balanced. For the first time since everything began, she was not standing below him. She was standing across from him. Adrian exhaled slowly, not visibly, but just enough for the shift to register, because now, the conversation had moved beyond what he expected, beyond what the system had planned for. "You should be careful," he said, his tone softer now, but not kinder, just more precise. Naomi held his gaze, her expression unchanged, because she recognized that tone. Not a warning. Not entirely. Something closer to interest. "I am," she replied, her voice calm, controlled, unwavering. And for a moment, neither of them moved, neither of them spoke, the space between them filled with something unspoken, something unfinished, something that neither of them had fully revealed yet. Because this was no longer about what had already happened. This was about what came next. And neither of them was ready to show their hand first. Naomi did not speak immediately after his last words, not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood that what came next mattered more than anything she had asked so far, and rushing it would only give him control of the moment again. So she waited, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged, letting the silence stretch just enough to shift the pressure back toward him. Adrian watched her closely now, no longer dismissive, no longer detached, but calculating in a way that confirmed something she had already begun to suspect. He had not expected her to come this far. "You think this was about avoiding responsibility," he said finally, his voice lower, more deliberate, as if choosing each word carefully, and Naomi felt it immediately, the shift in direction, the conversation moving away from denial and into something deeper, something less clean. She did not interrupt. That was the mistake she would have made before. Now, she let him continue. "It was not," he added, his gaze holding hers, not aggressive, not defensive, just controlled, and for a brief second, Naomi felt something unfamiliar in that tone. Not guilt, not regret, something closer to constraint. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged, but her focus sharpening, because this was the first time he was not repeating the same narrative. This was something else. "Then what was it?" she asked, her voice quiet, precise, not emotional, not demanding, just direct. Adrian did not answer right away. Instead, he turned slightly, his attention shifting toward the window for a brief moment, not to avoid her, but to create space, to choose what to reveal and what to keep. Naomi watched him carefully, noting the timing, the pause, the control in his movement, because now she understood that even silence from him was intentional. That night, he said slowly, still not fully facing her, was not about you. The words landed differently than she expected, not dismissive, not diminishing, but disorienting in a way that forced her to reframe everything she thought she understood. Not about her. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly at her side, not from emotion, but from the shift in perspective, because if that was true, then everything that happened was not just personal. It was strategic. You were part of it, he continued, turning back toward her, his expression unchanged, but his eyes sharper now, more focused, as if he was measuring how much she could process without breaking the structure entirely. But you were not the center. Naomi felt the impact of that more than anything else he had said, not because it hurt, but because it explained something she had not been able to articulate before. The precision, the timing, the lack of hesitation from everyone in that room. That only happened when the outcome was already decided. So what was the center? She asked, her voice steady, but quieter now, because she understood that this was not a question he was supposed to answer fully. And yet, he had already crossed a line by saying this much. Adrian's gaze held hers for a second longer, then shifted slightly, not away, but downward, as if considering the weight of what came next. A negotiation, he said finally. Naomi did not react outwardly, but inside, something aligned instantly, because that word fit too well. It explained the structure, the control, the need for a public moment that could not be questioned. And I was, what? She asked, her tone still even, but now there was something else underneath it, something colder, something more defined. Adrian did not hesitate this time. Leverage. The words settled between them, quiet, final, and for a brief second, the room felt smaller, tighter, as if everything that had happened since that night had just been reframed into something far more calculated than she had allowed herself to believe. Naomi inhaled slowly, her chest rising just enough to steady herself, because this was the piece she had been missing. Not denial, not personal rejection, utility. She had been used because she mattered in a way that had nothing to do with her. And that changed the meaning of everything. Leverage for who? She asked, her voice lower now, more focused, because the answer to that question was where the real structure existed. Adrian's expression remained controlled, but this time, he did not answer directly. Instead, he stepped back slightly, creating distance again, resetting the space between them, as if the conversation had reached a boundary he was not willing to cross. That is not a question you should be asking, he said, and Naomi recognized it immediately. Not refusal, protection, but not for her. For something else, something bigger. She held his gaze, her expression unchanged, but her mind moving rapidly now, connecting everything she had learned, everything she had seen, everything she had felt, and for the first time, the shape of it was becoming clearer, not complete, but enough to understand the scale. This was not just one system. This was layers, intersections, power operating through people who did not always control it, but served it. Naomi took a small step forward, not aggressively, not to challenge, but to hold the position she had claimed, her voice steady, precise. You did not deny me because you wanted to, she said quietly. Adrian did not respond. He did not need to. The silence confirmed it more than any words could. Naomi nodded once, slowly, her expression shifting just slightly, not softer, not emotional, but more certain, because now she understood something that changed the entire structure of the game. He was not just the one who acted. He was also being managed. And that meant the real decision had been made somewhere else. She turned her head slightly, her eyes narrowing just a fraction, her thoughts aligning into something sharper, something more dangerous, because now the question was no longer about him at all. It was about who stood behind him. And just as that thought settled fully into place, something else surfaced, something small, almost overlooked in the way he had spoken, but impossible to ignore once it connected. A negotiation. Naomi's breath slowed, her gaze sharpening, because negotiations only happened when something of value was at stake. And if she had been leverage, then someone had been trying to gain something. Something important enough to destroy her reputation in front of an entire room. And that meant one thing she had not considered before. The child might not be the only reason she was chosen. Naomi did not respond immediately after that realization, not because she was uncertain, but because she understood that what came next would define the balance between them, and balance was something neither of them truly had yet. She studied him in silence, not his words, but the space between them, the distance he maintained, the way he chose what to say and what to leave unsaid, because now she saw it clearly. He was not just protecting something. He was navigating it, and that meant he was not entirely in control either. That detail mattered more than anything else. If I was leverage, she said finally, her voice calm, measured, then you were part of the exchange. Adrian did not react outwardly, but Naomi caught it, the smallest pause, the slightest shift in his breathing, almost invisible, but enough. Confirmation did not always come in words. Sometimes it came in hesitation. Everyone in that room was, he replied, his tone steady, but there was something beneath it now, something less absolute, something that suggested limits, constraints he was choosing not to name. Naomi stepped slightly closer, not to challenge him, but to narrow the space just enough to change the dynamic, to force the conversation into something more precise. Then you understand what happens if I keep asking the right questions, she said quietly. Adrian's gaze held hers, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The tension between them no longer one-sided, no longer controlled entirely by him. It was shared now, balanced in a way that neither of them could ignore. I understand that you are already doing it, he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged, but inside, the calculation sharpened, because that sentence carried more than observation. It carried acknowledgement, and acknowledgement created possibility. Then you also understand, she continued, her voice steady, that I am not going to stop. A pause. Not long, but enough to shift something again. Adrian looked at her differently now, not as someone he needed to dismiss, not even as someone he needed to control, but as someone he needed to factor in. That was the shift. Subtle, but real. Stopping is not what I am concerned about, he said quietly. Naomi's eyes narrowed just slightly. Then what are you concerned about? For the first time, Adrian did not answer immediately. He stepped back toward the desk, not retreating, but repositioning, creating a different angle, a different line of control, and Naomi recognized it instantly. He was thinking, not reacting, thinking. You are moving without protection, he said finally, his tone more direct now, less layered, but no less controlled. That makes you unpredictable. Naomi let the words settle, her mind processing them not as a warning, but as information. Unpredictable. In a system built on predictability, that was leverage. And that concerns you, she said. Adrian did not deny it. That alone was enough. Naomi exhaled slowly, her posture relaxing just slightly, not in comfort, but in control, because now the structure between them had changed again. This was no longer just a confrontation. It was negotiation. Not formal, not declared, but real. You need something to stabilize this, she said, her voice quieter now, more precise, each word placed carefully, and I need access. The room went still, not silent, still, because that was the first time she had said it clearly. Not a request, not a demand, a position. Adrian watched her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable, but his attention fully locked now, no longer divided, no longer distant. Access to what, he asked. Naomi did not hesitate. The parts of the system you cannot openly control. Another pause, longer this time. He understood exactly what she meant. That was the point. You are asking to be part of something you do not fully understand, he said. Naomi held his gaze, her voice steady, unwavering. I already am. That answer changed something. She saw it, felt it. Not agreement. Not yet. But recognition. And recognition was the first step toward alignment, even if it was temporary. Adrian turned slightly, his attention shifting for a brief second, as if considering the implications beyond the room, beyond her, beyond this moment. And Naomi understood that this was where the real decision was being made. Not in words. In calculation. When he looked back at her, the shift was subtle, but undeniable. If this moves forward, he said slowly, it does not make you safer. Naomi almost smiled again, just slightly, because safety had never been part of the equation. I am not looking for safe, she replied. Another pause. Then, finally, a decision, not spoken directly, but implied in the way he stepped aside just slightly, not inviting her closer, but not blocking her path either. A space opened. Not trust, not acceptance, but access. Limited, controlled, conditional. Naomi felt it immediately, the shift in position, the line she had just crossed, not as an outsider forcing her way in, but as someone now being allowed to operate within the edges of something much larger than herself. But she did not move right away, because she also understood something else. This was not help. This was alignment of interest. Temporary, fragile. And as she stepped forward, just enough to claim that space without overreaching, one thought settled clearly in her mind, sharper than anything else. If he was willing to stand beside her for this, then he had something to lose too. And in a system like this, that made him just as dangerous as everyone else. Naomi did not move forward immediately after the space opened between them, because now the decision in front of her was no longer about access. It was about alignment, and alignment always came with a cost that was not visible at first. She could feel it, not in what Adrian said, but in what he did not say, in the way he allowed her closer without offering certainty, in the way his presence shifted from resistance to something more calculated, more conditional. This was not trust. This was positioning. And the moment she stepped into it, she would become part of something she could not fully control. Her breath slowed, her mind splitting into two clear paths, both sharp, both dangerous. One part of her, quieter, deeper, still carried the echo of something human, something that recognized the hesitation in his voice, the restraint in his words, the possibility that he was not entirely aligned with the system either. That part asked a question she had not allowed herself to consider until now. What if he is not the enemy? What if he is also trying to survive inside something he does not control? The thought was subtle, almost gentle, and that was exactly why it was dangerous. Because it created space for something she could not afford. Trust. Even a fraction of it would be enough to weaken her position, enough to make her hesitate at the wrong moment, enough to give the system exactly what it needed. Naomi's fingers curled slightly at her side, grounding herself, pulling her focus back into the structure she had built, because she knew better now. In a system like this, connection was not neutral. It was leverage, and whoever felt it first lost. Her gaze returned to Adrian, steady, controlled, searching not for intention, but for pattern, because she had learned that intentions could be hidden, but patterns always revealed truth. He had not denied what she said. He had not corrected her assumption. He had only adjusted his position to accommodate it. That was not support. That was adaptation. And adaptation meant one thing. He would protect his position before anything else. Always. Naomi took a slow breath, her chest rising and falling evenly. As the internal conflict sharpened into something clearer, something she could define, something she could control. If she allowed herself to see him as anything other than a variable, she would lose the advantage she had just created. If she stepped into this with anything less than full awareness, she would become exactly what she had been before. A piece, a tool, a pawn in someone else's negotiation. Her jaw tightened slightly, not from anger, but from decision, because now the choice was no longer emotional. It was structural, and structures did not reward hesitation. You said this does not make me safer, she said quietly, her voice steady, her eyes locked on his. But now there was something different in the way she held that gaze, something colder, something more distant, as if she had just removed a layer of herself from the interaction. Adrian did not respond immediately, but Naomi saw it, the shift, the recognition that something had changed on her side too. It does not, he replied. Naomi nodded once, slowly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, because that was not the point. Safety had never been the point. Control was. And control required clarity. Not hope, not connection, not trust, just clarity. She stepped forward then, not hesitating, not pausing, but not rushing either, her movement deliberate, her presence steady as she crossed the line that had been opened for her. But this time, she did it on her terms, not because he allowed it, but because she chose it. That distinction mattered more than anything else. Then we are clear, she said, her voice calm, precise, stripped of anything unnecessary, anything emotional, anything that could be misread. This is not about trust. Adrian watched her closely now, his expression unreadable, but his attention fully engaged, because he understood exactly what she was doing. No, he said quietly. Naomi's eyes did not waver. This is about leverage, she continued, her tone unwavering, each word placed with intention, each pause controlled. And right now, we both need something the other one can reach. The silence that followed was not empty. It was agreement without confirmation, alignment without comfort, a balance that existed only because neither of them could afford to break it yet. Naomi felt it settle into place, not as relief, but as structure, something she could stand on, something she could use. But she did not let herself forget what it was built on. Not trust, not understanding, mutual risk. And mutual risk always had an expiration point. She held his gaze for one more second, then slightly shifted her posture, not away from him, but away from the possibility of seeing him as anything more than what he was in this moment. A strategic position, a temporary alignment, nothing else, because anything else would cost her everything. And as that final layer of hesitation disappeared completely, replaced by something sharper, something colder, something far more controlled, Naomi made her choice, not out loud, not dramatically, but with absolute clarity. She would not trust him. She would not rely on him. She would use the space he created and control what happened inside it. Because in a system built on manipulation, the only way to survive was to become impossible to manipulate. Naomi did not leave the building immediately after that conversation, because walking away too quickly would have meant she was still reacting, and reaction was no longer part of her strategy. Instead, she adjusted her pace, slowed her movements, and allowed herself to remain inside the system just long enough to observe how it responded to her presence now that she had crossed the line. The difference was subtle, but it was there. The receptionist did not stop her. The hallway cameras did not shift, but the silence felt tighter, more aware. Naomi stepped into the elevator, her reflection steady in the mirrored walls, her eyes focused not on herself, but on the space around her, because now she understood something critical. The system did not move randomly. It moved in layers. And if she wanted to control it, she needed to think the same way. By the time she reached the street, her plan had already begun forming, not as a single action, but as a sequence, a structure of moves designed not just to reveal truth, but to control when and how that truth became unavoidable. She did not go home. Instead, she turned in the opposite direction, her steps deliberate as she moved into a part of the city she had not visited in months, a place quieter, less monitored, but still connected enough to matter. Her phone remained in her hand, but she did not open it yet. Not until she reached the exact point she had chosen. A small cafe, not crowded, not empty, balanced, controlled. She stepped inside, ordered without hesitation, then chose a table near the back, where visibility worked both ways. That mattered. Everything mattered now. Naomi placed her phone on the table and finally unlocked it, her fingers moving with precision as she opened 3 separate threads, not connected, not obvious, each one positioned to serve a different function in what she was building. The first was the former coordinator. The second was the unknown number that had warned her. The third was new. A contact she had not used before, someone connected to media distribution, someone who did not belong to the system, but benefited from what the system could not fully control. Naomi did not send anything yet. She paused, her eyes scanning each thread, mapping the order, the timing, the reaction she expected from each one. Because this was no longer about information. This was about sequence. Layer 1 pressure. She typed a message to the former coordinator. I know why the camera was placed. I know what it was meant to capture. She did not send it. Not yet. Layer 2 disruption. She opened the thread with the unknown number and typed something simpler. You are already late. That message, she sent immediately. No hesitation. Because that was not information. That was provocation. And provocation created movement. Naomi leaned back slightly, her breathing steady, her eyes lifting just enough to scan the room, not looking for anyone specific, but confirming something more important. No immediate reaction. Good. That meant the response would come from deeper within the system, not from the surface. That was where she wanted it. Layer 3, exposure. She turned to the third contact, her fingers hovering for just a second before typing. I have something that was removed. If it appears again, it changes everything. She saved the draft. Not sent. Because exposure without timing was useless. Naomi picked up her coffee, taking a slow sip as the pieces settled into place, her mind already running through the possible reactions, the timing, the order in which each layer would trigger the next. If the unknown number responded first, the system would tighten. If the coordinator reacted, the system would adjust. And if both happened within the same window, the system would reveal something it could not fully control. That was the opening. Not forced, not direct, but inevitable. Her phone vibrated. Once. Naomi did not look down immediately. She counted to 3, then slowly lowered her gaze. A reply. From the unknown number. Just one sentence. You are stepping into something you cannot reverse. Naomi's lips pressed together slightly, not in fear, but in recognition, because that was exactly the response she expected. Not denial, not dismissal, warning, which meant she had triggered the correct layer. She placed the phone back on the table, her fingers resting lightly beside it, her posture relaxed, but her mind fully engaged, because now the sequence had started. And once it started, it would not stop. Across the room, a man who had not been there before entered quietly, his presence subtle, his movement controlled, but Naomi noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed now. But she did not react. Not outwardly. Because that was part of the plan. Let them think they were still ahead. Let them believe they were still controlling the narrative. Because the truth was, they were already responding to hers. Naomi took another sip of her coffee, her gaze steady, her breathing even, as the layers she had set in motion began to shift, one by one, beneath the surface, unseen, unspoken, but impossible to stop once they connected. And somewhere, beyond what anyone in that room could fully see yet, the structure she had just built was already tightening, quietly, precisely, like something waiting for the exact moment to collapse inward. Naomi did not move when the man entered the cafe, not because she did not notice him, but because she had already accounted for observers, for watchers, for controlled responses, and his presence, at first glance, fit within the pattern she expected. But then something shifted. Not in him. In the timing. Her phone vibrated again, sharper this time. Not a single notification, but 2, almost overlapping, and Naomi felt it immediately, that subtle break in rhythm she had carefully constructed. That was not supposed to happen. She lowered her gaze slowly, keeping her posture relaxed, her breathing even, but inside, her mind recalculated instantly, adjusting, scanning for where the sequence had split. The first message was from the coordinator. Unexpected. Too fast. You should not be doing this here. Naomi's fingers stilled for half a second, her eyes narrowing slightly, because that was wrong. The coordinator was supposed to hesitate, to delay, to respond cautiously, not immediately, not directly. That meant one thing. He was already under pressure. Or worse, he was not responding on his own. Naomi did not reply. Not yet. She moved to the second notification. The third contact. The one she had not even activated. The draft message was gone. Her chest tightened, not from panic, but from recognition. This was not interference after the fact. This was preemptive. Someone had moved ahead of her timing. Someone had accessed the layer she had not even triggered yet. Naomi placed the phone down slowly, her fingers resting against the table, her expression unchanged. But inside, the structure she had built began to shift, not collapsing, but bending in ways she had not predicted. That was the danger, not failure. Distortion. She lifted her eyes slightly, scanning the room again, and this time, she saw it more clearly. The man near the entrance was not alone. Another reflection in the glass behind the counter. A second figure, positioned too precisely to be coincidence. This was no longer passive observation. This was containment. Naomi took a slow breath, forcing her mind to stabilize, because this was the moment that defined everything. If she reacted now, if she tried to regain control too quickly, she would expose the rest of her structure. She would lose all remaining leverage. But if she waited too long, the system would close around her completely. Her phone vibrated again. This time, from the unknown number. You moved too early. Naomi's jaw tightened slightly, the smallest visible shift, because that sentence confirmed what she had just realized. This was not just a response. This was a counter, and it had been prepared. That meant her plan had not just been noticed. It had been anticipated. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her posture still relaxed, her breathing controlled, but her thoughts accelerating, searching for the point of failure. Where did they see it? Where did they intercept it? The answer came faster than she wanted. Not at the message, not at the contact, at the pattern. She had created a sequence, and in doing so, she had revealed the structure of her thinking. That was enough. The system did not need to know her plan. It only needed to understand how she built it. Naomi's fingers curled slightly against the table, grounding herself as the realization settled deeper, heavier. She was not ahead. She had never been ahead. She had only been allowed to move within a space they had already mapped. The man near the entrance shifted slightly, his movement subtle, but enough to confirm something else Naomi could not ignore anymore. They were not just observing her plan. They were waiting for her to continue it, waiting to see how far she would go before they decided to close the space completely. That was control at a level she had not fully accounted for. Not reaction, anticipation. Her phone vibrated one last time. A new message. Unknown sender. No number attached. Just text. Stop now, and this ends quietly. Naomi stared at the screen for a second longer than she should have, her breathing slowing, her thoughts sharpening, because that was not a threat. It was an offer, and offers only came when something had gone far enough to matter. She lifted her eyes again, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged, but inside, the shift was undeniable now. The layers she had built were no longer unfolding the way she designed them. They were being redirected, intercepted, controlled in ways she had not predicted. And for the first time since she stepped into this, Naomi felt it clearly. Not fear, not panic, but something colder. A recognition she could not ignore anymore. She was not the only one building a trap, and whatever she had set in motion had already triggered something much larger than she intended. Naomi did not reach for her phone again after reading the last message, because now she understood something that changed the entire situation. The system had expected her to react, to panic, to try and fix what was already shifting out of her control, and that expectation was their last predictable advantage over her. So she did the opposite. She went still, not frozen, not overwhelmed, controlled stillness, the kind that did not give anything away. Her fingers relaxed against the table, her posture unchanged, her gaze soft, but focused as she let the tension settle instead of pushing against it. That was the first adjustment. Do not correct the plan. Replace it. Naomi slowly picked up her coffee again, taking a small sip, her movements natural, unhurried, because now every second mattered, not for action, but for perception. If they believed she had lost control, they would tighten. If they believed she was adapting, they would hesitate. And hesitation created openings. Her phone remained silent for a moment, then vibrated again, but Naomi did not look. Not yet. Instead, she shifted her attention outward, scanning the reflections again, confirming what had already changed. The man near the entrance was no longer pretending. His posture had adjusted. Slightly forward, slightly more focused. That was not observation anymore. That was readiness. Good. That meant they were expecting escalation. Naomi set the cup down gently and finally reached for her phone, unlocking it with steady fingers, her eyes moving quickly, not emotionally, but analytically. The coordinator had not sent another message. That silence was louder than anything he could have said. He was no longer a usable variable. Remove him. The unknown number remained active, but now it was no longer warning. It was monitoring. Adjust position. Then she opened something she had not touched yet. Not a message. Not a contact. A recording app. Empty. Unused. Until now. Naomi tapped it once, letting it run silently in the background, then placed the phone back down exactly where it had been, her expression unchanged, because this was no longer about controlling communication. It was about capturing reaction. That was the second adjustment. If she could not control the flow, she would control the record. Her eyes lifted again, this time deliberately, not scanning, but selecting, and they landed on the man near the entrance for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Not enough to confront, just enough to signal awareness. Then she looked away. That was the third adjustment. Let them know she knew, but not how much. Seconds passed. Then something shifted. The man moved. Not toward her. Not away, but sideways, creating a new angle. And that was the confirmation she needed. He was not leading. He was following instructions, which meant the real decision point was somewhere else. Somewhere she had not reached yet. Naomi's fingers tapped lightly against the table once, twice, then stopped. her mind already reconstructing the entire situation in real time, not as a failed plan, but as a redirected opportunity. If they had intercepted her structure, then they believed they understood it. And if they believed they understood it, then they would act based on that assumption. That was the gap. Not in their control, in their certainty. Naomi reached for her phone again, her movements slow, deliberate, as she opened a blank message, not sending it, not typing anything yet, just letting the screen stay visible, exposed, as if she was about to continue the same pattern they had already identified. Then she paused, and did nothing. That pause was the move, because now they would wait, and waiting would force them to reveal what they expected next. Her phone vibrated again. This time, she looked immediately. A new message. Same unknown sender. You are hesitating. Naomi's lips pressed together slightly, not in frustration, but in quiet recognition, because that was exactly what she wanted them to believe. Hesitation meant weakness, and weakness lowered defenses. She typed slowly this time, each word placed carefully. No, I am choosing. Then she sent it. No explanation, no follow-up, just enough to break their expectation. She placed the phone back down, her posture unchanged, but inside, everything had shifted again, not into chaos, but into something sharper, something more controlled, because now she was no longer trying to execute a plan they had already seen. She was forcing them to reveal theirs. Across the room, the man near the entrance paused, just slightly, his hand moving toward his ear, a subtle gesture, but enough. Communication. Real time. Naomi watched it without reacting, her breathing steady, her focus absolute, because this was the moment that mattered. Not what she did, what they did next. And then it happened. The door behind the counter opened briefly, and for just a second, Naomi caught a glimpse of something she had not seen before. A screen. Multiple feeds. Angles. Not just this cafe. Other locations. Connected. Coordinated. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, her mind locking onto the image, storing it, because that was not just observation. That was infrastructure. And infrastructure was something you could trace. Naomi leaned back slightly, her expression calm, but inside, something had already settled into place, something solid, something real. They had taken her evidence. They had disrupted her plan. But, in doing so, they had shown her something far more valuable. Not who was watching, but how they were watching. And that was something they could not erase. Naomi did not look away from that brief glimpse behind the counter, because now she understood something that changed everything, not just the system, but her position inside it. It was not just about watching. It was about coordination. Multiple feeds, multiple locations, a network that did not rely on one point of control, but on many, all connected, all feeding into something larger. And that meant one thing. If she could not break the system, she could redirect it. Her fingers moved slowly toward her phone again, her movements calm, controlled, but her mind sharper than it had ever been, because now she was no longer guessing. She was acting on something real. She opened the recording app, confirming it was still running, then adjusted the angle of the phone slightly, just enough to capture more of the room without drawing attention. That was step one. Capture the response, not just from one person, but from the environment itself. Then she did something no one in that room expected. She stood up. Not abruptly, not dramatically, smooth, intentional. And instead of leaving, she walked toward the counter. The man near the entrance shifted immediately. Naomi felt it without looking. Good. That meant he was reacting in real time. That meant she was already inside their operational layer. She stopped just short of the counter, her posture relaxed, her expression neutral, and for a brief moment, nothing happened. Then she spoke. Not loudly, not quietly, just enough. Your back room has 6 active feeds, she said, her voice calm, precise, as if she was stating something obvious, something already confirmed. The barista froze for half a second. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. That was all Naomi needed. Behind the counter, the door remained closed, but the energy shifted instantly, subtle but undeniable, like a current moving beneath the surface. Naomi did not push further. She did not demand anything. She did not accuse. She simply let the statement exist. Because now, the system had a new problem. She was no longer just reacting to what they showed her. She was acknowledging what they tried to hide. Her phone vibrated again. This time, she did not need to look to know what it was internal communication, adjustments, real-time recalibration. Naomi turned slightly, not fully away from the counter, just enough to change her angle, her gaze sweeping briefly across the room, catching the reflection of the man near the entrance again. His posture had changed. More rigid, less fluid. That was not control. That was uncertainty. Naomi exhaled slowly, her heartbeat steady, because this was the moment she had been building toward, not through force, not through exposure, but through positioning. She had stepped into their system and made herself visible inside it. Not as a target, as a variable they could not ignore. She reached for her phone again, her fingers steady as she opened the blank message she had left earlier, the one they had been watching, the one they expected her to use the same way she had before. But this time, she changed the sequence. She typed a single line. "I know where the signals converge." Then she sent it. Not to the unknown number. Not to the coordinator. To the third contact. The one outside the system. The one who did not need permission to act. Naomi placed the phone down slowly, her eyes lifting again, her expression unchanged, but inside, the shift was absolute now. This was no longer about testing. This was activation. The reaction was immediate. Not from her phone. From the room. The door behind the counter opened slightly, not fully, just enough for a figure inside to glance out, their eyes scanning, searching, calculating, and for the first time, Naomi saw it clearly. They were not watching her anymore. They were trying to assess how much she had already seen. That was the difference. That was power. The man near the entrance stepped forward, just one step, controlled, careful, but no longer distant, and Naomi felt it instantly, the shift in proximity, the tightening of the space around her, not aggressive, not threatening, but cautious. Measured, because now, she was no longer predictable. She turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his for the first time directly, not challenging, not inviting, just aware. And in that brief moment, something passed between them. Not words, not intent, recognition. He understood it. She saw it in the way his eyes held just a fraction longer than before. She was no longer inside the system as a subject. She was interacting with it as an equal. Variable. Naomi picked up her coffee again, her movements calm, almost casual, but her presence now carried something different, something heavier, something that shifted the balance in the room without a single raised voice. She took a slow sip, then set the cup down, her gaze steady, her posture relaxed, but her control absolute. Because now, she held something they did not. Not proof. Not yet. But direction. And direction was enough to destabilize everything. Around her, the subtle movements continued, the small adjustments, the quiet communication, but it no longer felt like she was being watched. It felt like she was being measured. Carefully. Cautiously. As if everyone in that space had just realized the same thing at the same time. She was no longer the one being controlled. And that realization was enough to make them hesitate. Naomi did not need to look at her phone to know the message had already traveled beyond the room, beyond the quiet coordination behind the counter, beyond the controlled environment that once felt untouchable, because she could feel the shift before she saw it, in the way the air tightened, in the way the silence no longer belonged to them alone. It belonged to her now too. She stood still for a moment longer, letting that realization settle fully into place, not rushing it, not reacting to it. Because this was not just a change in position. This was a change in gravity. Around her, the subtle movements continued, but they were different now, no longer fluid, no longer seamless, but slightly delayed, slightly uncertain, as if every action required confirmation before it could proceed. Naomi noticed it immediately. That hesitation, that fracture, that was where control began to break. Her phone vibrated once more, and this time, when she looked, the message was not from an unknown number. It was from Adrian. No introduction. No context. Just one line. "Where are you?" Naomi read it once, her expression unchanged, but inside, something sharpened instantly, because that message alone told her everything she needed to know. He did not ask what she was doing. He did not ask what she had found. He asked where she was. Location, not information. That meant he had lost something more important than knowledge. He had lost positioning. Naomi did not reply immediately. She let the message sit, letting the weight of it build, because now, timing mattered more than content. She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping the room once more, and then, Without hesitation, she typed a response. "You are already late." Then she sent it. Across the room, the man near the entrance shifted again, more noticeably this time, his posture tightening, his eyes flicking briefly toward the back before returning to her, and Naomi saw it clearly. Communication had accelerated. The system was no longer observing. It was reacting. Her phone vibrated again. "Adrian." Faster this time. "Do not do this here." Naomi's lips pressed together slightly, not in hesitation, but in quiet recognition, because that was not a command. That was pressure. And pressure only appeared when control was slipping. She tilted her head just slightly, her gaze lowering for a moment as she read the message again. Not for meaning, but for tone, for the subtle shift that confirmed what she already felt. He was not controlling the situation anymore. He was trying to contain it. Naomi took a slow breath, her fingers steady as she typed her next response, each word deliberate, each pause intentional. "You said I was part of a negotiation." She stopped, then added, "Now I am setting the terms." She sent it. This time, there was no immediate reply. That silence was louder than anything he had said before. Naomi lifted her eyes again, her posture relaxed, but her presence sharper, more defined, as she watched the room adjust around her, not smoothly, not invisibly, but with small fractures that revealed something deeper. Uncertainty. For the first time, the system was not ahead of her. It was catching up. Her phone vibrated again, and this time, when she looked, the message was longer. "Adrian, you do not understand what you are triggering." Naomi's expression did not change, but inside, something shifted again, not in doubt, not in fear, but in clarity, because that sentence carried something new. Not control, not certainty, concern, real concern. She read it once, then locked her phone without responding, because now she understood something even more important than before. He was no longer speaking from a position above her. He was speaking from inside the same system, reacting to something he could not fully control either. That was the shift. That was the fracture. Naomi turned slowly, her gaze settling once more on the man near the entrance, and for a brief second, she held it, not aggressively, not challengingly, just long enough to make one thing clear. She knew. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. And that was enough to change how they saw her. Because now, she was no longer the variable they could adjust. She was the one forcing adjustments. Her phone vibrated one more time. Adrian again. This time, no hesitation. No structure. Just a single sentence. "Stop before this gets out of control." Naomi stared at the screen for a second longer than necessary, her breathing steady, her expression calm, but inside, the realization settled fully into place, sharper than anything she had felt before. He was not telling her what to do anymore. He was asking. And for the first time since she had stepped into this world, since she had been placed into that moment, since everything had been taken from her in front of that room, she saw it clearly. The balance had shifted. Not completely, not safely, but undeniably. She lowered the phone slowly, her gaze lifting again, her posture steady, her presence grounded in something that no longer depended on their approval, their structure, or their control. And somewhere, beyond the messages, beyond the silence, beyond the system itself, Adrian was no longer the one deciding how this would end. And that was something he could feel too. Naomi did not move when the last message faded from her screen, not because she was unsure of what to do next, but because for the first time, she no longer needed to guess. Everything that had felt fragmented, manipulated, hidden behind layers of silence and control was finally aligning into something complete. Not because they told her, because they reacted. Her eyes lifted slowly, not scanning the room this time, but seeing it, truly seeing it. Every detail now connected to something larger, something deliberate, something that had started long before she ever stepped into that room the night everything changed. The camera placement, the timing, the silence from everyone present, the immediate denial, the erased evidence, the pressure, the coordination. None of it was random. None of it was personal. And that was the truth that hit the hardest. It was never about rejecting her. It was about using her. Naomi exhaled slowly, her chest rising, then falling, her fingers resting lightly against the table as the realization settled fully into place, heavy, undeniable, and yet clarifying. That night had not been about a relationship. It had not been about shame. It had not even been about her voice being dismissed. It had been about control. A controlled narrative. A staged moment. A calculated event designed to serve a negotiation happening behind the surface, where people like her were not seen as individuals, but as leverage points, variables to be positioned, adjusted, and if necessary, sacrificed. Her jaw tightened slightly, not from anger alone, but from the weight of understanding, because now she could see every piece. The man in the background. Not a guest. A placement. The camera. Not documentation. Direction. The silence in the room. Not confusion. Compliance. And Adrian. Not the architect she had first believed, but a participant, a controlled asset within a structure that operated above him, around him, through him. That was why he denied it. Not because it was not true, but because the truth was never meant to exist in the first place. Naomi's breath caught for a brief second, her hand instinctively pressing against her stomach, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, something more raw, because this was where it all came together, where the emotional weight collided with the structural reality. They had not just tried to erase her voice. They had tried to erase her significance, to turn something real into something disposable, to reduce her existence in that moment to a tool for someone else's gain. And for a brief second, just a second, the anger surged, sharp, immediate, overwhelming, rising from a place she had been holding back since the beginning, a place filled with humiliation, confusion, isolation. Every moment she had questioned herself, every time she had wondered if she was wrong, if she had imagined it, if she had misunderstood what happened in that room. But she had not. She had been right. Every instinct, every doubt, every question, they had all pointed to the same truth. And now, there was nothing left to hide behind. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, her breathing uneven just long enough to feel it, to let the emotion exist without suppressing it, because this was not weakness. This was clarity, and clarity demanded a response. When she opened her eyes again, something had changed, not visibly, not dramatically, but fundamentally. The confusion was gone. The hesitation had disappeared. In its place was something far more dangerous. Certainty. She was not fighting for validation anymore. She was not trying to prove something to people who had already decided her role. She was no longer asking for acknowledgement. She was stepping into something else entirely. Accountability. Naomi picked up her phone again, her fingers steady, her gaze focused, not on the messages, not on the system, but on what came next, because now she understood the full picture. This was not just about exposing what they did. It was about dismantling the structure that allowed them to do it without consequence. And that required something more than reaction. It required intention. Her reflection in the dark screen looked back at her, calm, composed, but no longer uncertain, no longer searching, because the moment of doubt had passed. She knew exactly what this was. She knew exactly what they had taken. And more importantly, she knew exactly what they had underestimated. Her. Naomi set the phone down slowly, her posture straight, her presence steady, her mind already moving ahead, because now, there was no question left. No hesitation. No alternative path. What they had done was not just wrong. It was deliberate. And that meant one thing. They would not stop. Not on their own. Not without pressure. Not without consequence. Naomi lifted her gaze one last time, her eyes steady, her expression calm, but beneath it, something unshakable had taken root, something that could not be undone, could not be erased, could not be negotiated away. This was no longer about surviving what they did to her. This was about making sure they could never do it again. And for the first time since everything began, she was not just ready to fight back. She was justified. Naomi did not return home that night, because home no longer existed as a place of safety, only as a place that could be traced, predicted, and used against her. Instead, she moved through the city with purpose, not rushing, not hiding, but choosing every step as if it mattered, because now it did. Every movement, every pause, every decision had weight. The system was no longer watching her to understand her. It was watching her to prepare for what came next. And she was doing the same. Her phone remained in her hand, but she did not open it immediately, not until she reached the location she had already selected, a neutral ground, not connected to them, not tied to her past, a place where movement could be observed without being controlled. She stepped inside a quiet office building, not hers, not theirs, but accessible enough to serve one purpose. Convergence. Naomi stood still in the center of the room for a moment, her gaze steady, her breathing even, as she allowed everything she had learned to settle into a single, unified structure, not scattered thoughts, not fragments of suspicion, but a complete map of what she was about to face. Because now she understood the scale. This was not just a confrontation with one person. It was a confrontation with a system designed to erase accountability. And that meant one thing. When it broke, it would not break quietly. She unlocked her phone and began moving, not emotionally, not impulsively, but with precision, activating the layers she had built, not all at once, but in sequence, each one designed to pull a different part of the system into the same moment. The third contact received the first signal. A file request, not the evidence itself. A trigger, something to initiate external pressure. Then the unknown number. A message. It is already in motion. No details. No explanation. Just enough to force reaction. Then finally, Adrian. Naomi paused for a second before typing, her eyes steady, her expression unreadable, because this message was not just communication. It was a line drawn. You said I do not understand what I am triggering. Now you will. She sent it. Then she set the phone down slowly, her fingers resting against the table, her posture straight, her presence completely still, because now, there was nothing left to prepare. Everything had been set. Around her, the silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt charged, like something building just beneath the surface, waiting for the exact moment to break. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, not in doubt, not in fear, but in focus, allowing herself one last moment of stillness before everything moved beyond control, because she knew this was the point of no return. There would be no adjustment after this. No correction. No second chance to reposition. Whatever happened next would define everything. Her phone vibrated once. Then again. Then a third time. Not messages she needed to read. Signals. Reactions. The system was moving. Faster now. Less controlled. Less precise. Naomi opened her eyes slowly, her gaze steady, her breathing even, but inside, everything had aligned into something unshakable. She was ready, not just to respond, to confront. Because now, every piece was in motion. The people, the information, the pressure, all converging toward the same point, the same moment. And at the center of it was her. She picked up her phone one last time, not to check anything, not to respond, but simply to hold it, to feel the weight of what she had just set into motion, because now she understood something with absolute clarity. This was no longer their system alone. It was a battlefield. And for the first time, she was not stepping into it unprepared. Outside, the city continued as if nothing had changed, but Naomi could feel it, the shift beneath it all, the quiet acceleration of something that could no longer be contained, something that had already begun to unravel in ways no one could fully control anymore. She stood there, completely still, her eyes focused, her mind clear, her presence grounded in a certainty that did not waver, because now, there was no doubt left. No hesitation. No fear. Only inevitability. And as her phone vibrated again, sharper this time, more urgent, Naomi did not look down. She did not need to, because she already knew. It had started, and there was no stopping it now. Naomi did not turn when the door opened behind her, because she had already counted the seconds, already measured the silence between each vibration on her phone, already calculated exactly when he would arrive. Timing was no longer something she reacted to. It was something she controlled. The footsteps were steady, deliberate, not rushed, but not relaxed either, and Naomi could hear it in the rhythm, the difference from before. Adrian was not entering a room he owned. He was stepping into one where he no longer dictated the outcome. She let him take a few steps inside before she spoke, her voice calm, even, without turning to face him. You came faster than I expected. A pause behind her. Then his voice, lower than usual, tighter, carrying something that had not been there before. You forced the timeline. Naomi allowed herself a small breath, almost imperceptible, not in reaction, but in acknowledgement, because that was the first admission. Not denial. Not control. Adjustment. She turned slowly then, her gaze steady as it met his, and for the first time, she did not feel the weight of his presence pressing down on her. It was equal now. Measured. Balanced. No, she said quietly, her tone precise. I revealed it. Adrian's eyes held hers, sharper than before, more focused, but beneath that focus, Naomi saw it clearly now. Not dominance. Not certainty. Calculation under pressure. That was new. You think exposing fragments gives you control, he said, stepping closer, not aggressively, but with intent, trying to reclaim space, to reestablish the distance that once defined their dynamic. Naomi did not step back. Not even an inch. I think you would not be here if it did not matter, she replied, her voice steady, her posture unchanged, and for a brief second, the silence between them tightened, filled with something heavier than before. Adrian exhaled slowly, not visibly, but enough for Naomi to register it, because now she was watching everything. Every pause, every shift, every moment where he had to choose his next move instead of controlling it instinctively. You are creating a situation you cannot contain, he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her expression calm, but her eyes sharper now, because she recognized the structure of that sentence. It was not a warning. It was a projection. Containment was never the goal, she said. Another pause. Longer this time. Adrian's gaze flickered for just a fraction of a second, not away, but inward, as if recalculating something he had not needed to consider before. Naomi saw it. She felt it. That was the shift. He was no longer responding to her as a variable. He was adapting to her as a force. You are assuming this ends in your favor, he said, his voice more controlled now, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. Naomi let that settle, her fingers resting lightly at her side, her breathing even, her presence grounded, because now she understood the difference between assumption and positioning. No, she replied softly. I am assuming this does not end quietly. The room went still. Not silent. Still. Because that was the truth neither of them could deny anymore. Whatever this had become, it had moved beyond control. Adrian stepped closer again, this time stopping just within her space, not crossing the line, but testing it, and Naomi held her ground, her gaze unwavering, her expression unchanged. You are not the only one who understands how this works, he said, his tone lower, more direct, as if trying to pull the dynamic back into something familiar, something he could navigate. Naomi almost smiled, just slightly, not with amusement, but with clarity, because she no longer needed to challenge him directly. She only needed to reflect what he already knew. No, she said, her voice calm, measured. But I am the only one here who is not trying to protect it. That landed. She saw it. Not in his words. In the pause that followed. In the way his expression held just a fraction longer than before, as if something had shifted beneath the surface, something he could not immediately correct. Because that was the truth he could not dismiss. He was part of the system. She was not anymore. Naomi took a slow step to the side, not away from him, but around him, shifting the angle, changing the space, forcing him to turn slightly if he wanted to maintain eye contact. And he did, instinctively. That was another shift. Subtle, but undeniable. She was no longer the one adjusting to him. He was adjusting to her. You said I did not understand what I was triggering, she continued, her voice steady, her pacing deliberate, each word placed with intention. But you are the one asking me to stop. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, the smallest visible crack in the control he had maintained for so long, and Naomi felt it immediately, not as victory, but as confirmation. Because there are consequences you are not accounting for, he said, more firmly now, the first real push in his tone, but even that carried weight differently than before. Naomi turned her head just slightly, her gaze still on him, but softer now, not weaker, just more precise, because she understood exactly where to press next. Then tell me, she said quietly, what happens when the system cannot erase the outcome? Another silence. He did not answer. Not immediately. And that hesitation was louder than anything he could have said. Naomi let it sit between them, not filling it, not breaking it, because this was no longer about winning the moment. It was about holding the position. And she was. Completely. But even as the balance shifted, even as the control between them redefined itself, Naomi could feel it clearly beneath the surface. This was only the first layer, the first confrontation, the first crack, and whatever came next was going to be far more dangerous than anything either of them had revealed so far. Naomi did not answer his last silence with another question, because she understood something now that made questions unnecessary. He was no longer holding information she needed. He was holding something else, something far more fragile in a system like this: position. And position could be taken. The air between them tightened, not because either of them moved, but because something had already shifted beyond words, beyond control, beyond the structure they had both been navigating until this moment. Naomi took one slow step forward, closing the distance he had been trying to maintain, not aggressively, not emotionally, but with absolute precision, and for the first time, Adrian did not adjust immediately. That hesitation, that fraction of a second where he did not reclaim space, did not reassert control, was enough. Naomi saw it, felt it, used it. "You keep talking about consequences," she said quietly, her voice lower now, more grounded, each word landing with intention. "But you have not asked the only question that matters." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly, his focus sharpening, but beneath it, something else moved, something less controlled, something reactive. "And what is that?" he asked. Naomi did not answer right away. She let the silence stretch, let the weight of anticipation settle into the space between them, because now she controlled the pacing, not him. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached for her phone. Not to check it, not to respond, to show it. She turned the screen toward him, her gaze never leaving his face as she spoke. "What happens when I do not need you anymore?" The words landed harder than anything she had said before, not because of the tone, but because of what followed. On the screen, a live waveform moved quietly, steadily, capturing everything, every word, every pause, every shift in his voice from the moment he entered the room. Adrian's expression did not break immediately, but Naomi saw it. The flicker, the instant calculation, the realization of what that meant, not just here, not just now, but outside, beyond this room, beyond his reach. "You recorded this," he said, his voice lower, tighter, no longer carrying the same controlled distance it once had. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her expression calm, almost detached, because now this was no longer about proving anything. It was about forcing reality into a place where it could not be denied. "I did not need proof before," she replied, her tone even, "but now, I need permanence." That word settled heavily, because permanence was the one thing the system could not tolerate, the one thing it was built to eliminate. Adrian took a step forward, this time without calculation, without the careful control he had maintained, and that alone told Naomi everything she needed to know. He was no longer managing the situation. He was reacting to it. "You think that changes anything," he said, but the edge in his voice had shifted, no longer sharp with authority, but strained with something else. Urgency. Naomi did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She did not push. She simply held her position, her gaze steady, her presence unshakable, because she did not need to escalate. She had already broken the structure. "No," she said softly. "I think it changes everything." A pause. Heavy. Unavoidable. Adrian's jaw tightened, his eyes locked on hers, searching, recalculating, trying to find the angle that would restore control, but Naomi could see it clearly now. He was no longer ahead. He was trying to catch up. "You do not understand the scale of what you are interfering with," he said, his voice more forceful now, but beneath it, the certainty was gone, replaced by something far more revealing. Pressure. Naomi's lips pressed together slightly, not in hesitation, but in quiet acknowledgement, because she had heard that before. Not as a truth, as a defense. "No," she repeated, her voice steady, unwavering. "You do not understand the scale of what you already did." The words hung between them, not loud, not dramatic, but final in a way that could not be undone, because this was no longer about strategy, no longer about positioning, no longer about negotiation. This was accountability, and there was no structure left to hide it. Adrian's gaze faltered, just for a second, just enough, and Naomi felt it like a shift in gravity, a complete reversal of everything that had defined their dynamic until now. He was no longer the one controlling the narrative. He was inside it, and she was the one holding it in place. Naomi lowered the phone slowly, her fingers steady, her posture unchanged, but the space between them had transformed completely, no longer a balance, no longer a negotiation, but something else entirely. Dominance. Not loud, not aggressive, absolute. Neither of them spoke. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that mattered had already been decided in the silence that followed. A silence so heavy, so complete, that even the system surrounding them seemed to pause, as if recognizing, for the first time, that it was no longer in control. Naomi did not speak, because she no longer needed to add pressure. The pressure was already moving, spreading beyond the room, beyond Adrian, beyond anything that could be contained in a single moment. She could feel it in the silence, not still anymore, but unstable, like something cracking beneath the surface, piece by piece. Adrian did not move either, but his stillness was different now, no longer controlled, no longer deliberate, but forced, as if any sudden shift might accelerate something he could no longer slow down. Naomi watched him, not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with clarity, because what was happening now was not something she needed to drive forward. It was something that had already begun collapsing on its own. Her phone vibrated again. Then again. This time, she did not ignore it. She looked. Multiple notifications. Not from the same source. Not coordinated. That was the first sign. The system was no longer speaking with one voice. It was fragmenting. One message from the third contact. We are seeing activity. This is bigger than expected. Another, from a number she did not recognize. People are asking questions. This is spreading. And then, silence from the unknown number. That silence was louder than anything else. Naomi lifted her eyes slowly, her gaze returning to Adrian, and she saw it clearly now. He had seen it too. The shift, the fracture, the moment where control no longer held. You did not just expose a moment, he said quietly, but his voice had changed, the weight of it different now, less controlled, more grounded in something real. Naomi did not respond. She did not need to, because he already understood. This was no longer about a single event. It was about the structure behind it, and once the structure became visible, it could not hold itself together the same way. The room around them began to change in ways that were almost imperceptible, but undeniable. The man near the entrance stepped back slightly, not in retreat, but in uncertainty. The door behind the counter opened again, but this time, no one looked out. No one checked. No one controlled the movement. That was the second sign. The coordination was breaking. Naomi exhaled slowly, her posture steady, her presence calm, but inside, she could feel it, the chain reaction she had set in motion, not through force, not through destruction, but through exposure, through pressure applied at the right points, at the right time. She had not dismantled the system. She had made it visible to itself. And that was enough. Adrian's gaze shifted slightly, not away from her, but beyond her, as if he was seeing something else now, something unfolding outside this room, something he could not fully track anymore. That was new. That was the difference. He was no longer the center of the system. He was just another part of it. They are already adjusting, he said, more to himself than to her. But Naomi heard it clearly. Not certainty, not control, observation. Of course they are, she replied softly, her voice steady, not mocking, not emotional, just factual, but adjustment means exposure. Another pause. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, and Naomi saw it. Not resistance, not anger, but realization, the kind that comes too late to prevent what has already started. Because now, every adjustment they made would reveal something else. Every attempt to regain control would expose another layer of what they had been hiding. That was the domino effect. Not loud, not immediate, but irreversible. Her phone vibrated again. A new message. From the coordinator. They are distancing themselves. Names are being removed. Naomi read it once, her expression unchanged, but inside, the structure became even clearer. The system was not defending itself. It was shedding weight, cutting connections, isolating risk. That was not strength. That was survival. And survival always left something behind. She looked up again, her gaze steady, her presence unwavering, because now she understood something with absolute clarity. She did not need to chase them. They would begin to separate themselves, one by one, each trying to protect their own position, each creating gaps in the structure that once held them together. Adrian took a slow breath, his posture shifting just slightly, not back into control, but into something else, something more grounded, more aware of the reality unfolding around him. "This will not end the way you think," he said. But the certainty was gone, replaced by something quieter, something more uncertain. Naomi met his gaze, her expression calm, but her eyes sharper than ever. "It already did," she replied. And in that moment, the weight of what she had done settled fully into place, not as a single victory, not as a single moment, but as a process that had already begun unraveling everything that had been built to suppress her. Around them, the silence no longer belonged to control. It belonged to collapse. Not visible yet, not complete, but inevitable. Naomi did not move. She did not speak again, because now there was only one thing left to do. Not to prove, not to expose, but to finish. And as the last vibration of her phone faded into silence, she knew with absolute certainty. The system was no longer standing. It was falling, and she was already standing above it, waiting for the final piece to break. Naomi stood exactly where everything had led her, not moving, not reacting, because movement was no longer necessary. Everything that mattered was already in place. The room felt different now, not because anything physical had changed, but because control had shifted so completely that even the silence carried weight in a new way. It no longer pressed down on her. It responded to her. Her phone rested in her hand, still, quiet, but no longer passive. It was no longer a tool. It was a trigger, and she knew exactly what it would set into motion the moment she chose to act. Around her, the fragments of the system continued to adjust, small movements, quiet reactions, attempts to reassemble something that had already begun to break apart beyond repair. The man near the entrance no longer held his position with confidence. The door behind the counter no longer opened with purpose. Even the air itself felt uncertain, as if the structure that once defined it had lost its center. Naomi breathed slowly, evenly, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that no longer carried hesitation, no longer carried doubt. Because there was nothing left to question. Every piece had revealed itself. Every layer had been exposed. Every decision had led her here. And now, there was only one thing left. Adrian had not moved, but he was no longer still in the way he once was. There was tension in him now, not controlled, not hidden, but present, visible in the way his focus held on her, searching, calculating, but no longer certain. That was the difference. He was no longer deciding the outcome. He was waiting to see what she would decide. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation, her expression calm, her posture steady, but beneath it, something unshakable had taken form, something that could not be undone by pressure, by silence, or by control. This was no longer about survival. It was no longer about proving what happened. It was about defining what came next. "You can still stop this," Adrian said quietly, but the words did not carry authority anymore. They carried something else, something closer to caution, to consequence, to the recognition that whatever she chose now would not be reversible. Naomi let the words settle, not dismissing them, not reacting to them, but acknowledging them as what they were. Not control, not command. A final attempt to influence what he could no longer control. She looked down at her phone for the first time in several seconds, her fingers resting lightly against it, her mind not racing, not calculating, because there was nothing left to calculate. The outcome was already determined. Only the moment remained. She thought, not about the system, not about Adrian, not about the layers of power that had tried to define her, but about the beginning. The moment she stood in that room, alone, exposed, dismissed, her voice turned into something insignificant, something easy to erase. The doubt, the confusion, the silence that followed, and then everything that came after. The pressure, the manipulation, the realization, the choice to not accept it. Naomi lifted her gaze again, her eyes steady, her expression clear, not hardened, not emotional, just certain. Because this was not about revenge. It was about correction, about balance, about making something that had been controlled visible. And once something was visible, it could never be undone. Adrian took a slow breath, his posture shifting just slightly, not forward, not back, but uncertain, and that uncertainty spoke louder than anything else. "This does not just affect them," he said, his voice lower now, more grounded in reality than control. "It affects everything connected to it." Naomi nodded once, slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding, because she already knew that. That was the point. It already did, she replied. A pause. Final. Heavy. The kind that only exists when there is nothing left to negotiate. Naomi's fingers moved slightly, not hesitating, not trembling, just moving, because the moment had arrived, not suddenly, not unexpectedly, but exactly as it was meant to. She looked at the screen one last time, not to check, not to confirm, but to acknowledge. This was the line, the one that separated everything that had been done to her from everything she was about to do. And for the first time since the beginning, there was no fear attached to it. No hesitation. No second thought. Only clarity. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxed, her posture steady, her presence absolute, because now, she was not reacting to the system anymore. She was defining the outcome of it. Her thumb hovered over the screen for just a fraction of a second, not because she needed time, but because she understood the weight of the moment, the finality of what came next, the fact that once this moved forward, there would be no return to what existed before. And then she made her choice. Naomi did not rush the moment her thumb touched the screen, because this was not an action driven by impulse. It was the final step of a sequence that had already been unfolding long before this second existed. The message did not explode outward. It did not flood every channel at once. It moved with precision, with structure, with intention. First, a single file left her phone, routed through the contacts she had chosen carefully, not someone inside the system, not someone tied to its rules, but someone who benefited from clarity rather than control. The recording was not raw. It was edited, clean, focused, every word contextualized, every silence framed, every shift in tone preserved exactly as it happened. Not to overwhelm, not to accuse, to reveal. Naomi lowered her hand slowly, her breathing even, her posture unchanged, because she understood something the system had failed to account for. Control was not about hiding everything. It was about deciding what was seen when it was seen, and how it was understood. And now, that control belonged to her. Adrian did not speak immediately, but Naomi saw the moment it reached him, not through a notification, not through a device, but through the subtle shift in his expression, the tightening of his focus, the realization that what had been contained was no longer contained. "You released it," he said quietly. Naomi met his gaze, her voice steady, her tone without hesitation. "No," she replied. "I placed it." That distinction mattered, because she had not destroyed the system. She had repositioned the truth inside it, where it could no longer be ignored, but also could not be misused without consequence. Around them, the reactions began, not loudly, not dramatically, but in ways Naomi had already anticipated. Messages, calls, movement, not coordinated, not controlled, fragmented, each response revealing another crack, another shift, another loss of alignment. Her phone vibrated again, but this time, she did not need to read it to understand what was happening. The third contact had moved. The information was no longer isolated. It was circulating. Not everywhere. Not yet. But enough. Enough to create pressure in places that had once been silent. Enough to force people to choose between distance and exposure. Naomi turned slightly, her gaze moving past Adrian, not dismissing him, but no longer centering him, because this was no longer about him alone. It was about everything connected to him. "You could have stopped this," he said, but his voice no longer carried the same weight, no longer held the same authority. Naomi let the words settle, not reacting to them, but recognizing them for what they were. Not control, not command, regret. "No," she said calmly. "You could have." The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with understanding, the kind that comes too late to change what has already been set in motion. Naomi picked up her phone again, her fingers moving with the same precision as before, not to escalate, not to expand, but to limit. She opened a second message, one she had prepared but not yet sent, and with a single motion, she released it. A boundary, a statement, a defined scope of what would be revealed and what would remain contained. Because this was not about burning everything down. It was about restoring balance, about making sure the system could no longer operate. Without consequence, without accountability, without resistance. That was her standard. That was her control. Adrian watched her closely, his expression no longer unreadable, no longer distant, but grounded in something real, something that had replaced the certainty he once carried. "You are not ending it," he said, his voice lower now, more measured. "You are changing it." Naomi nodded once, slowly, her gaze steady. "That is the only way it holds." The weight of that truth settled into the space between them, heavy, undeniable, because now there was no illusion left, no narrative to hide behind. What had been done could not be undone. What had been revealed could not be erased. And what had been set in motion would not stop. Outside the room, the system continued to shift, not collapsing completely, but reconfiguring under pressure, shedding what it could no longer protect, exposing what it could no longer control. Naomi felt it, not as chaos, but as consequence, the natural result of a structure forced to confront itself. She lowered her phone for the last time, her posture steady, her presence calm, because her role in this moment was complete. Not as a victim, not as a reaction, but as a force that had redefined the outcome. And as the reactions continued to spread, as the names began to separate, as the silence that once protected them turned into something else entirely, Naomi understood something with absolute clarity. This was not the end. It was the cost. And now, everyone would have to pay it. The noise did not disappear all at once. It faded, slowly, unevenly, like something that had been stretched too far and finally released, leaving behind a quiet that felt unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable. Naomi stood in the same place, but everything around her had shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but in a way that could be felt in every breath, in every pause, in every absence of tension that had once defined the space. The system had not vanished. It had adjusted. It had pulled back, recalibrated, restructured itself around the pressure she introduced. And in doing so, it had changed. So had she. Her phone rested loosely in her hand now, no longer vibrating with urgency, no longer demanding immediate response, because the wave of reactions had reached its peak and begun to settle into something more stable, more controlled, more real. Messages still came, but they were different now, no longer frantic, no longer fragmented, but measured, careful, aware of the new reality that had been established. Naomi did not open them immediately. She did not need to. She already understood what they would say. Distance, clarification, realignment. People redefining their positions, their connections, their silence. The room no longer held the same weight either. The man near the entrance had stepped away completely, no longer guarding, no longer observing, just present, uncertain, disconnected from the role he once held. The door behind the counter remained closed, not because it was being controlled, but because no one knew what purpose it served anymore. Even Adrian had changed. He stood a few feet away, no longer attempting to reclaim space, no longer testing the boundary between them, but existing within it, acknowledging it, understanding it. Naomi looked at him, not with tension, not with resistance, but with clarity, because whatever existed between them before had been redefined entirely. He was no longer a figure of control. He was a part of the consequence. "They are responding," he said quietly, his voice steady, but different now, no longer carrying the need to influence, only the need to acknowledge what was happening. Naomi nodded once, slowly, her gaze steady, her posture relaxed. "They have to," she replied. And that was the truth. Not because she forced them to, because the system no longer allowed them to ignore it. The silence that followed was not heavy anymore. It was settled, not empty, but complete in a way that did not demand more. Naomi took a slow breath, her shoulders easing, her mind no longer moving ahead, no longer calculating the next step, because there was no next step in the way there had been before. The sequence had ended. What remained was the result. She walked toward the window, her steps unhurried, her presence grounded, and looked out over the city, the same city that had felt so distant before, so indifferent, so unaware of what had been happening beneath its surface. It looked the same, but it was not, and neither was she. The reflection in the glass caught her attention for a moment, not because she was searching for something, but because she recognized the difference without needing to analyze it. The hesitation that once lived in her expression was gone. The doubt that once shaped her choices had disappeared. In its place was something quieter, stronger, not loud, not aggressive, certain. She turned slightly, her gaze moving back toward Adrian, and for a brief moment, they held eye contact again, but it was no longer a confrontation. It was acknowledgement. He understood what had changed. So did she. This will not go back to what it was, he said, his tone even, almost reflective. Naomi did not hesitate. It should not, she replied. And that was enough. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove. The system would continue. It always did. But it would not be the same system. Not after this. Not after her. Naomi looked down at her phone one last time, her thumb brushing lightly against the screen, not to act, not to send, but simply to close what had been opened. She powered it off. Not as a retreat. As a choice. A boundary. Because control was no longer about reacting to everything. It was about deciding what no longer required her attention. She slipped the phone into her bag, her movements calm, deliberate, and for the first time since everything began, there was no tension left in her body, no pressure pulling her forward, no weight holding her back. Just stillness. Balanced. Earned. She turned toward the door, her steps steady, her presence quiet, but undeniable, and as she walked out, she did not look back, not because she was avoiding it, but because she did not need to. What happened behind her no longer defined her. What mattered was what remained within her. And as the door closed softly behind her, the world did not rush in, it did not overwhelm. It simply existed, calm, steady, unchanged on the surface, but carrying the quiet echo of something that had shifted beneath it all. And in that calm, Naomi moved forward, not as someone who had survived, not as someone who had reacted, but as someone who had chosen and changed, and finally arrived at a place where silence no longer meant powerlessness, but peace. The city did not change overnight, not in the way people could point to or name, but something subtle had shifted beneath its surface, something that could be felt in the pauses between conversations, in the careful way people chose their words, in the quiet. Awareness that what had once been hidden was no longer guaranteed to stay that way. Naomi walked through it without urgency, without the weight that had once followed her every step, because she was no longer moving through a world that defined her by silence. She had redefined her place within it. The days that followed were not loud. They were not dramatic. There were no grand announcements, no sudden collapses that made headlines in a single moment. Instead, there was a steady unraveling of what had once been tightly controlled. Names that had carried influence became quieter. Connections that once operated without question were now examined, reconsidered, sometimes abandoned. The system did not disappear, but it no longer moved with the same certainty. And that difference was enough. Naomi did not chase what came next. She did not involve herself in every ripple of consequence, because she understood something now that she had not understood before. Power was not in controlling every outcome. It was in knowing which outcomes no longer required her control. She returned to her life, but it was not the same life she had left behind. The spaces she moved through felt different, not because they had changed, but because she had. The uncertainty that once shaped her decisions was gone. In its place was something quieter, something more grounded, something that did not need validation from anyone else to exist. She carried herself differently now, not with force, not with defiance, but with a calm certainty that did not waver, even when the world around her shifted. People noticed, not because she demanded attention, but because she no longer gave away her presence. It belonged to her. Entirely. Adrian did not disappear either. Their paths crossed again, not by accident, but not by design. This time, there was no tension waiting to be resolved, no imbalance waiting to be corrected. There was only recognition. He saw her as she was now, not as someone inside the system, not as someone reacting to it, but as someone who had stepped beyond it and forced it to change. And Naomi saw him clearly as well, not as a figure of control, not as an obstacle, but as part of something that had been altered, something that could not return to what it was. They did not need to say much. They did not need to revisit what had happened, because everything that mattered had already been spoken in the choices they made, in the silence they no longer allowed to define them. The distance between them was no longer about power. It was about truth, and truth did not require negotiation. Naomi moved forward without looking back, not because she was avoiding the past, but because she had already taken everything from it that she needed. The pain, the confusion, the doubt, they had all transformed into something else, something stronger, something that could not be taken from her again. She no longer questioned her voice. She no longer second-guessed her instincts. She no longer waited for permission to exist within her own reality. She had claimed it, fully, and in doing so, she had changed more than her own story. She had changed the rules of the space she once stood powerless in. That was the legacy she left behind, not destruction, not chaos, but a shift, a permanent mark that could not be erased, no matter how much the system adjusted around it. Because once something is seen clearly, it can never return to being invisible. Naomi stopped briefly at a quiet intersection, the city moving around her in its usual rhythm, cars passing, people walking, conversations blending into the background, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel it, not the tension, not the pressure, but the absence of it. The calm that followed everything she had endured, the balance she had fought to reclaim. She did not smile. She did not need to. The stillness within her was enough. Then she stepped forward again, not as the person she had been at the beginning, not as someone shaped by what had been done to her, but as someone who had taken control of what came after, someone who had turned injustice into clarity, and clarity into action, and action into something that could not be undone. And as she disappeared into the movement of the city, her presence no longer loud, no longer visible in the way it once needed to be, what remained was not her absence, but the shift she had created, the quiet, undeniable change that lingered in every space she had touched. Because in the end, she had not just exposed the truth. She had redefined what happens when someone refuses to be erased. And that truth would echo far longer than any system built to silence it. They tried to erase my voice, but all they did was teach me how to make it impossible to ignore.